Go ahead and call this meeting to order. And Mr. Secretary, if you could call the roll, please.
Commissioner Insami Dalton,
Present.
Commissioner Craig,
Present.
Commissioner Glick. Excused. Commissioner Hosey,
Present.
Commissioner Kelly,
Here.
Commissioner Cott,
Present.
Commissioner Lawson,
Present.
Commissioner Pence,
Here.
Commissioner Suker,
Here.
and myself, Commissioner Choma.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. With that, I guess we will go ahead and proceed to the first item on the agenda, the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. Director Mead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will probably call you Mr. Chairman a lot for a
That's
while, so I apologize in advance. Okay, so we've got a number of things we're gonna just want to provide updates on today as part of the workshop. The first one's the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. We've mentioned this over the last couple meetings where our office was successful in getting a $25 million grant through the Natural Resource Conservation Service. We just want to give you an update on how that process is going. So I'm going to have Sarah Barkston. You might recall from our last meeting, she's our grant administrator that we just hired not too long ago. Come on up, Sarah. She's been doing a great job trying to keep up with the NRCS and learn this program.
Welcome, Ms. Barson.
Let's push that. Next one over. This one. There you go.
Good afternoon, everyone. Madam Chair. Okay. So as Jason mentioned, I'm here to talk about the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, or RCPP. My presentation has a lot of acronyms, so please bear with me. I'll try to just say them, and then there'll be abbreviations and so forth. Just to acquaint you all with the RCPP, it is a partnership of Wyoming Water Development, the USDA, NRCS, and our partners and in our project area, which is the Upper Colorado River Basin in Wyoming. This is the award as it is presented on the NRCS website. If you have a phone and you want to scan the QR code, that'll bring you to the web page and you can see what awards were made in 2023. We are the lead partner as the Wyoming Water Development Commission, and the office has been supporting that effort. This is a project in the critical conservation area called the Upper Colorado River Basin, and we were awarded $25 million. The focus will be on projects that improve water use efficiency, water management, and decrease system water losses. This is the project area for those who aren't familiar, and just want to reiterate, I'm kind of going to some detail here for the benefit of anyone who doesn't know and the public. But hopefully you all are familiar. This includes the Upper Green and the Little Snake subbasins, but generally the Upper Colorado River Basin in the state of Wyoming. All right, so our RCPP is number 3207, and rolling out the RCPP award is a detailed process. The Wyoming Water Development Office staff have been moving swiftly, and NRCS staff have been very supportive and responsive along the way. This monumental effort is made possible through the partnership that is core to the RCPP, including Wyoming Water Development, NRCS, plus the non-lead contributing partners. And I'll give you a brief summary of all that we've accomplished since my start date of February 20th of this year, as well as the steps that must be completed that are necessary for signups this fall. First and foremost, kudos to Chase Tavalli and those who supported him in being awarded this RCPP grant. And secondly, I've only been with the Wyoming Water Development for a little over 2 months. And while I bring years of experience, there's been a lot to process, and I've been quickly getting up to speed. Regular meetings with NRCS started as question and answer sessions are now active development of the Programmatic Partnership Agreement, or PPA. And that has been done through the RCPP digital platform. The PPA is similar to an MOU that sets forth roles, responsibilities, outcomes, and deliverables. And note, it does not obligate funds. It is purely roles and responsibilities. The PPA has gone through national review, so we have made some significant progress. And the NRCS has stated literally that they are thrilled with our progress and that we've made and the quality of our work. We're tying up loose ends before the PPA is circulated for signatures, and that deadline is May 18th. And we will begin negotiating the supplemental agreements, or SA, that will obligate funds for technical assistance. The technical assistance will be used for some of our expenses related to outreach and education, and the majority of the TA, the technical assistance, will be used toward design of projects and oversight of construction. With our portion of TA, we will contract with an engineering firm that is experienced and qualified to meet NRCS standards and specifications in developing designs. And we hope to start that contracting process in the next couple weeks, but understand that it takes several weeks before we select the consultant and begin contract negotiation. The contract for technical assistance will not be executed until a supplemental agreement, or SA, is signed with NRCS. And so the next step will be NRCS and Wyoming Water Development introductory meetings. So those will be meetings in the field with our local folks here in the project area. NRCS will make the formal announcement. So while we are talking about this publicly, the PPA is still in negotiation. The supplemental agreements have not begun a negotiation, and we are looking to them to lead the next step, which is, again, the formal announcement. And then we will begin partner coordination with projects that have already started and will be contributing to this RCPP as of the award letter date, which was November 1st of last year. My position also involves producer education and outreach. So financial assistance will be provided for these projects in the project area based on the valuation methods and reimbursement procedures with NRCS. And all this needs to come together for signups this fall. The estimated distribution of the $25 million RCPP award is a few things. The NRCS gets technical assistance, the I for implementation, and that's 14%, $3.5 million. The Wyoming Water Development gets technical assistance implementation also for $2.25 million, and that's 9% of the total pot of money. And that will be used to contract our technical assistance, the engineering firms that will compete for a contract through our office. We have $500,000 for technical assistance E, which is for enhancement, and that includes the education, outreach, collaboration, communication activities in order to get these projects off the ground. And then the biggest pot of money is the 75%, which is $18.75 million, which will go to producer contracts as well as off-farm projects. Please note this is estimated, and the PPA, the Programmatic Partnership Agreement, is still under negotiation. Chase early on reached out to partners and other stakeholders for the RCPP for a list of NRCS practices that would be applicable to this RCP project. And this is the list that we came up with. I apologize, part of this is obscured by the little stuff at the top. But in general, we have a list of primary practices. That's the 2 columns. And then the smaller list, I'm sorry, you probably won't be able to read that. I'm happy to share these lists with you all. But these were, this commonly associated practices are only to support the primary practices that are the larger font. So just to recall, all these practices will support our objective for the RCPP, which is implementing NRCS practices such as converting open canals to pipe, improving diversions, or lining conveyances on a wide scale in both basins will improve efficiency and provide drought resiliency through improved water use efficiency, decreased system water losses, and improved water management. And we have one practice on this list at the very top, telemetry and SCADA, that doesn't have an NRCS number. And that's because there isn't a practice associated with that currently. We have submitted data and anecdotal information to NRCS for them to review at the regional level for cost share reimbursement for fiscal year 25. So the hope is that equipment will be part of our RCPP project. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions you may have. We do have a little bit of discussion on the various agreements and contracts, but I am happy to sit here and answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Barkston. Are there any questions from the commission?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Suker?
just curious, this is all taking place in Wyoming. Is there any redundancy for Colorado, Utah that's similar to what we're doing for redundancy that you know of?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Suker, as far as redundancy, all the work that we would potentially do through this will be in Wyoming. I guess I'm not sure if the state of Colorado or districts within Colorado have also put in for RCPP funding and received it. This isn't the Inflation Reduction Act funding, which we hope that we might be able to kind of partner up with this funding. We don't know all those details yet, but so that's the best answer I can give you. All the projects are going to be in Wyoming. Obviously, water conservation benefits will benefit the entire Colorado River, which is part of the reason for the NRCS being interested in this, as well as the federal government being interested in providing funding through the Inflation Reduction Act.
Well, just my opinion, we're doing it, but there's a lot more I think that could be done downstream from where we're at. So I was just curious if there was any allocation there.
Yeah, Madam Chair. Yeah, the Inflation Reduction Act would be, I guess, the other upper basin states' potential opportunity at doing similar stuff. We just went another step. And again, Senator Hicks had a lot to do with suggesting we might look into this to be able to possibly make any money that comes through us through the Bureau of Reclamation through the IRA funds, make that go even further by applying for these NRCS funds. And if the IRA funds don't come in, then we'll be ahead of the game because at least we have the $18 to $25 million to get projects on the ground. So
Thank you. That answers my question.
All right, any further questions?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Craig?
well, two questions really. What will the commission's role be in this? And the second part of this is, how will the funds be accounted for? Will they be in one of our accounts or will there be another account? How will that be managed?
Madam Chair, let's answer the second question first, if we know the answer to that. And I'll let, as far as I know, most of these agreements are between the producer and the NRCS. So the funds would go directly from NRCS to that producer. In the instance where we're going to have, say, bundled projects that are maybe a little bit more complicated that come through water management agencies, such as a conservancy district, for example, then we would have a contract or an agreement with that water management entity to complete a project. And then the funding would be kind of funneled through the Water Development Office as in reimbursements is the way I see it. So we're not going to get $25 million into account and then, be able to draw interest on it from what my understanding is at this point. It's more of a reimbursement type program. The first question, I'm glad you brought that up. That's one of the things I wanted to discuss with the group here today is, I guess, the commission's role. So two things. One is Sarah mentioned the technical assistance consultant that we want to bring on board. So that would be an engineering consultant, no different than what we hire for some of our studies. The difference being we are using federal funding because that, again, if you can throw up that slide that has the dollar amounts in the pie chart, there's about 2.25 million for technical assistance. And what we would like to do is get 2 consultants on board for the design of projects. So when we start talking with sponsors, working with our conservation districts, start bundling those projects up, they're going to need to be designed. typically, the NRCS does a lot of that design, but we all know resources are limited and there's going to be quite a few projects that potentially come out of this. So we want to be able to use our technical assistance to fund those designs. The ones that do come through the NRCS directly with producers, I believe those designs would be completed potentially through the NRCS's 3.5 million if NRCS does those designs. But again, this amount of projects, it might take years and years, knowing all the other work that the NRCS needs to do for designs. So getting a couple of consultants on board to do that. What I'd like to be able to do is, in the past, when we've had these third-party NEPA contracts where we're doing NEPA analysis for a reservoir, for example, the federal agency is kind of in control of things, no different than here. We've got to follow, NRCS rules and everything, but they will allow us to go through our state procurement process to hire these consultants. So what I'd like to do to try to abbreviate this as much as possible is to have our staff complete those consultant selections. So we would go out, we'd advertise for it probably about the same time as the rest of the planning projects that we'll talk about tomorrow. But then knowing that this is our full-time job, you guys have full-time jobs and you're doing the commission thing out of the goodness of your hearts, we could probably get those RFPs out and the proposals reviewed in a shorter amount of time, since we're working on that every day, and possibly get something turned around the August timeframe, as opposed to, we don't go to do interviews until October and then so on and so forth with the legislative session. So I'd like to be able to get your guys's authority or approval, buy-in to run the program and to actually, and I'll talk about this further in a second, but get your authority to be able to sign consultant contracts, amendments to contracts. We hear, PPA, the agreement with the NRCS, these supplemental agreements. There's going to be a lot of paperwork going on, and I don't want to necessarily have to wait for an upcoming commission meeting or call a special meeting to keep this moving and actually get stuff done on the ground. So my thought on the consultants were we'd start off with maybe two $250,000 contracts. We obviously have more TA money, or anticipate to have more TA money when all these agreements with the NRCS are signed. But I don't want to make them too big for a couple of reasons. One is we want to know that whatever consultant we do hire is going to perform well for us. So we don't want to tie up money if that isn't the case. I've got a lot of confidence in Wyoming consultants, so I'm not anticipating that. But also, if we need additional help, let's say we've got a ton of projects coming in, we've got 2 consultants, we may need a third or a fourth when we start seeing the level of interest in the program. So, yeah, I think that's one question, I guess, for the group is if there's a comfort level in allowing our office to really administer this program and do that.
Okay, thank you, Director. Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, so first to Jason, we did include language in the omnibus construction bill, I believe, for giving the full authority for the office and the commission to implement all aspects of this program. So that's already in the statutes in the non-codified section. So it would just be basically the commission telling the office, get the program running. But statutorily, that's in place already. So a question for Sarah. So, and you've alluded to the fact that there'll be a tear down type of application process back through those local NRCS offices. There's been mentions of conservation districts. So give me if you discussed a hypothetical time frame as to where to get the education out for those individuals, because it's a number of across that. It's a big region. How many, when are the meetings? How are we going to do the outreach to get those entities up to speed? I'm sure you've had some conversations with NRCS and they're in contact with their offices, but just a little bit more on that, if you would, please.
Director.
Madam Chair, Senator, to answer that question is a little complicated because we are following the lead of NRCS. We are working within their timeline and we have to follow the steps. So we are planning to have the programmatic partnership agreement or PPA signed by May 18th. Everyone's been working again diligently, very responsive. As you know, we're working on a couple amendments to things to get that PPA final. Then we need to immediately start the process of the supplemental agreements, but concurrent with that actually can be the NRCS and Wyoming Water Development introductory meetings. So, as early as the end of this month, as early as June, again, depending on the timeline of NRCS and kind of getting these steps completed. Thank you.
Madam Chair, and Senator Hicks, I just might add to that. And again, I haven't been sitting in on all these NRCS meetings, so I don't know exactly all the rules and things, but the initial thought and the initial contacts back last July when we were all thinking about trying to even apply for this were with the conservation districts that make up that Colorado River within Wyoming, and working with the local subdivisions of government conservation districts because they know the producers the best, right? So my hopes are to circle back with them after we have more discussion with NRCS to kind of know what the ground rules are, and then come up with a plan to, for example, open houses where we provide some informations and then we sit there all afternoon for people to be able to come in and ask questions or things like that, but to get back out, but utilize those conservation districts and have them help us out.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, just one follow-up. I wouldn't limit it to just the conservation districts because you have irrigation districts and water conservancy districts that may have their own staff and their procedures that are familiar with you. I'm just thinking of Big Sandy and Meeks Cabin, that are conservancy district, Eden Valley Irrigation District and stuff to make sure that we include them in any discussions. Or make sure they're on the invitation list to have these meetings with producers because they may be the legal entity that would actually enter into an agreement with NRCS for some of these funds instead of just an individual producer. So just as a FYI, let's make sure we capture those entities.
Okay. Madam Chair, if I could maybe take the consultant selection piece a little bit further. I forgot to mention a couple things. So I think the way we envision this being set up is it'll be kind of an overall contract with a couple of consultants, one for each consultant. But then as we start getting applications or start talking with producers and getting an idea of what the projects are, then we would take back to those contracts and say, okay, we're going to give you a task order to go design A, B, and C projects. And then they're done with those. The next group might go to consultant number 2. We're going to give you a task order to do that. And it'll kind of be piecemeal. It'll be an overall thing, but not to spend any funding until you get approval from the office to move forward with a particular task order. So it's going to be, the initial signing of those contracts once we go through the consultant selection process, amendments to those contracts to add task orders, potentially if they're performing well, to amend additional federal technical assistance into those contracts or go hire another contractor if we feel like we need to have more ability to get projects done quicker. And so I'd like to maybe hand it over to Patrick in regards to what Senator Hicks said about kind of the authorities that we see that are already in place, and then to see if you guys have a comfort level with that, or if you want to actually make a motion tomorrow for something to make it even more clear. So.
Thank you, Director. Patrick?
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, kind of piggybacking on what Jason mentioned and what Senator Hicks brought up. If you look at this year's omnibus planning bill, it gives authority to the commission to enter into these NCRS contracts and to enter into contracts with water rights holders or producers. Now, the commission does have authority to promulgate rules to delegate administrative duties to the Water Development Office. It has done that by rule. If you look at the commission rules, Chapter 8, Section 3, there's a little subsection in there that delegates to the Water Development Office the ability to administer federal or other sources of funding for water or land resource planning. And that's a pretty broad delegation of authority. So, and because it's broad, so it's one of those things where it kind of sounds like, yeah, this would allow the office to sign these contracts, the PPA, the technical assistance contracts, that kind of thing, but it's not explicit. However, if you refer to Chapter 3, Section 2 of the commission's rules, the commission has stated in rule that the director, Mr. Mead, or his designee, or other members of the commission may sign contracts if so authorized by the commission. So we talked about this some, Jason and I did, and we think it's important to make this as clear as possible that tomorrow at the meeting that the commission proffer a motion, maybe something that says motion to authorize the director of the Water Development Office to sign contracts with the NCRS, with water rights holders and others for the purpose of implementing our CCP projects or something similar to that, just so the director's signatory authority is in fact clear.
Thank you, Patrick. So essentially, basically, we can refer to the per chapter 3, section 2, the commission rules to delegate director or his designee to sign contracts with NCRS or other people.
That's correct, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I just want to make sure everybody's comfortable with that. We're trying to move faster than what they always say, the speed of government, right? So,
Yes.
so if anybody has concerns, we'll do our best to administer the program and make the right decisions, just like we normally would. So,
All right, Director, any other further questions? Commissioner Craig?
Madam Chair, would it be appropriate to have an item on the agenda for this discussion tomorrow if we were to offer an amendment?
we've got an item agenda that we have on there that just says any other action requiring Water Development Commission, and I'll say / select water commission or committee approval. We'll just talk about it again at that point.
Could we ask that maybe you prepare the language for a motion?
Sure. Yep.
Yeah.
Patrick,
Yeah,
can you prepare me a motion?
Commissioner Craig, yeah, that's no problem. Yeah, we can email that to Jason.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Bergsten. Any other questions for the director, Patrick, Ms. Bergsten, before we close up here? Okay, so we understand that we'll have to have a motion tomorrow with respect to this, as long as it's what the commission desires. And does that have to be approved by Select Water as well? No.
Madam Chair, I would say since there was the language about the RCPP in last year's omnibus construction bill that kind of gave the authority
Right.
to the commission to administer it.
No.
I would suggest not, but if they have any concerns, I'd encourage them to speak up tomorrow and bring up those concerns or have more discussion.
Thank you, Director.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Bergsten. Okay.
And Madam Chair, just real quick before we move on, I'm assuming based on the response that you guys are okay with us moving forward with the consultant selection process, using our staff and agency staff to get that done as quickly as possible when we get to that point. So,
Everyone seems to be okay.
okay.
Thank
right,
you,
thanks.
Director. Okay, so the next item on our agenda is the redundancy of water delivery systems. And I guess you'll be having Mr. Brewer? address
Madam
this?
Chair, I asked Bill to come up because this may turn into conversation where I need his help. So I'll do my best to lead the conversation. We are on tab A of the e-notebook. I'll try to get there myself here real quick. And it'll be up on the screen too.
No, no. You can
Okay, so Madam Chair, this particular legislation came through the Joint Appropriations Committee during the last session. I think it was when we were in House Appropriations. There was some language added to the construction bill, and if you turn to the, I guess you're electronic here, but the next page, so it'd be page 7 of our bill, and it's highlighted there. It says F, Project Redundancy of Water Delivery Systems. So this was added, and We didn't request for it to be added. It just got added. So it says the project sponsors Wyoming Water Development Commission. The project purpose is statewide municipal rural domestic water supply. Description, adding redundancy of domestic water delivery statewide. And then with a budget of $6 million, and then you go on to the next page. And that $6 million would come from what came out of the budget bill, which gives the authority of to the governor that some of the ARPA projects that basically aren't moving along and don't look like they're going to be able to spend their funds in time that meet up with the federal government's requirements, that the governor's office would sweep those funds and then be able to more or less reallocate them to eligible type projects and programs that ARPA could fund. And as part of that discussion, that's what it's referring to on the top of page 8 would be any funds that the Water Development Program would receive through replacement of some of the water development dollars, or that were recouped. $6 million of that would go to fund these redundancy type projects. And I'll start off by saying we don't normally fund, as a rule of thumb, it's not in our criteria that we can't, but don't fund redundancy projects because they are backups, they're wants, not needs. And we don't have the funding capacity to do that. We got to give everybody one of something before we even think about giving them two as a backup, right? But here we are and need to figure out what we're going to do here. And I guess real quick, when we think of redundancy and we started thinking about this language, we think of a number of different things, and I'll just throw out some examples. One would be additional wells. You have one well, you meet DEQ standards with that well because you've got enough storage to make it by if that well goes down. So a backup well would be redundant, right? A transmission pipeline. You have a transmission pipeline that runs just fine. You just want one next to it in case the first one breaks, okay? Backup pumps would be another example. If you were looking at storage, storage tanks within a system and you needed 500,000 acre feet of storage or gallons of storage, and you wanted 600,000 gallons of storage, you get to a point when you look at storing municipal water where you can have problems with water age. So you don't want to get too carried away with, so you can't circulate the water in a timely manner. But if you were somewhere between what you needed and where you'd have a problem with water age, that would be additional kind of backup redundancy. Another one would be backup power. Okay, if the power goes out, you have a generator that you can flip on to be able to then keep things going. So those were some examples we came up with. So now we get back to the wording of the statute. So I'll refer you back to page 7. And I've had conversations with our attorney, Patrick, here about this. And there are some issues associated with the language when we look at the project sponsor being the Wyoming Water Development Commission. Typically, our project sponsors are spelled out. For example, Green River, Rock Springs, Sweetwater County Joint Powers Board. And the reason I bring that up is because in each omnibus water bill construction, we have more or less general provisions that go along with it and are referenced. And when you look at those general provisions, a sponsor by definition is a municipality, conservancy district, irrigation district, water district, so on and so forth, right? Commission's not a sponsor typically. That then goes on to say that the sponsor, it says the commission shall contract with each sponsor. So we can't really contract with ourselves because we're named as a sponsor here. For the design, construction, and operation of the project, the sponsor shall supervise design and construction. So, and then also the sponsor shall be responsible for operation and maintenance of the project. So we don't want to, as the state of Wyoming, obviously go out and hire a contractor to go build a redundancy project for some sponsor, because we don't want that liability. That's why it's set up the way it is. So we think there's an issue with the fact that we've got the sponsor being the state of Wyoming or the Water Development Commission to actually execute this. So in my mind, and if you have more legal questions, we can kick it to Patrick here in a minute, but there's kind of two options in my mind. We can, well, it's hard to implement the way it is, at least the language. So there would need to be something done next legislative session to clean that up. So one, I guess the Select Water Commission could say, go back to the legislature next year, get it cleaned up, then we'll see what we can do. The other option would be to say, Water Development Office, go out, let everybody know this funding is available, take application by September 1, like we normally would for construction projects. You know, put your heads together, figure out which ones, you know, we should recommend to you guys, come back in November, figure out what those are going to be, and then put those in the construction bill and clean up the language that there's an issue with all at the same time. So that's, I guess, a question. And if Patrick, if you want to add anything to what I just said, feel free.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Madam Chair, I think Jason put it pretty succinctly that provision in the legislation that defines the sponsor as the Wyoming Water Development Commission is problematic for many of the reasons Jason mentioned, in regard to potential liability, to how this project is actually going to work on the ground. You know, as far as I understand, the commission would not want to be responsible for the operation and maintenance of these water redundancy projects. So I think it's imperative to get that language shored up at the next legislative session.
Thank you, Patrick. And so then tomorrow we would have to have a motion essentially saying something to the effect that we authorize the Wyoming Water Development Office to solicit projects and to put them into the construction bill and have the ask that the legislature fix this language. Correct, Jason?
Madam Chair, I suppose I'd like to have some conversation about it right now, to see what people's thoughts are, and maybe some conversation that includes the Select Water Committee, since it came through the legislature. So,
So Select Water Committee,
anybody had any thoughts?
Senator Kolb?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, just in reading this more thoroughly and hearing your explanation, it seems pretty clear that it's not going to function as they thought it was going to with the $6 million appropriation. It looks to me like it's going to need legislative change to clean the language up so it can be used. I guess it's going to revert in 26 or 25 back to the water account. Yeah, so we've got to get it cleaned up, it seems, the next legislative session. I guess the question I have is this: would you want to solicit projects at this point for this? Because you can't actually execute anything the way it's written. It looks like it. I mean, what's your opinion about that? Do we just wait and clean up the legislative level, or should we have more conversations with anybody wanting to have a redundancy project submitted?
Yeah. Madam Chair, Senator Kolb, I think it could probably work either way. You'd have to put some kind of, if you just went back to the legislature and said, hey, we need to clean this up to make it ready for game time, you know, and Patrick and I discussed this a little bit, maybe you need to put a special condition in there that then allows us to go contract with legal entities, legal sponsors that are entities, legal entities. If we came about it the other way, then we need to start thinking about how do we, I'm guessing we will get more projects than $6 million worth of projects. So then, you know, what are we looking at? This doesn't fit our regular program. So Bill and I have been talking about that a little bit. So then do we look at what is the percent of the system, for example, that it affects? If it's 50% of the system, would we value that higher than if whatever the redundancy project was affected the entire system, for example? Or do we look at the greatest population that's potentially affected by what they're trying to accomplish with this? Another one, and a lot of these are Bill's ideas because he's more familiar with the construction side of things, but how often is it needed? If it's a backup generator, how many times in the last 5 years have they actually had power outages? Is it a constant thing? They're always getting lightning strikes, or has it happened once? You know, is it maintenance related, whatever they're looking at? If it was, then it's probably not really a redundancy project. They should get in line and for the normal program. Is it an act of God where if you had Noah's Ark flood, it would wash out this side of the river and the transmission pipelines over there. So we need another transmission pipeline over here, just the likelihood of that happening, not great probably, but it could happen. So how do you look at these different projects and weigh them against each other? Again, I don't think it's going to be a cookbook type process. We would just have to consider different things like that when we got applications in, and then make our best recommendations to you guys in November and get your thoughts. So as far as a recommendation on one side or the other, I don't know if I have a great recommendation. I'd like maybe some more conversation. Maybe they'll convince me of something.
All right, thank you, Director. Senator Hicks.
Oh, Madam Chairman, I'm just mindful of the fact that with all the other programs that the commission and the office administer, you have criteria that establishes all of those things that the director just talked about. And absent any criteria for a statewide redundancy for municipal, seems to me like one of the first things you would have to do would be to go out and develop some criteria back to all of these unanswered questions, because you can't do it after you get all the applicants in and then develop the criteria. So the criteria almost has to come before the applications. I'm a little bit worried about just saying, well, let's throw something together and not going out and get public input. Typically on criteria, you guys do a draft, it's posted, it goes out for public comment, comes back, and that's how you adopt and develop the criteria is eligibility for the projects. The thing where the agency is the sponsor also is inconsistent with how the program actually runs. And so as somebody that may have been guilty in the past, usually when you throw stuff like this in a budget, it's usually good to consult with the agency before you do this, but that didn't happen here. So I'm kind of in agreement with Senator Kolb. I think this needs a little more discussion. I'm really cognizant of the fact that it expands the program without any discussions with the commission or the office. Kind of a last minute, let's just expand the program because it's a pet project. That worries me of setting that precedent. But had we been more clear on the language, it probably would have worked. I'm a little concerned of lack of criteria, rolling out for applications, trying to do the criteria on the fly to make sure that everybody gets an equal playing field at this $6 million. And then it establishes, once you do the criteria, you just expanded the program. Given our financial constraints in the last couple of years, that's a little bit worrisome. So, and again, I look at the budget language in there. We need a little bit explanation on the timing of the ARPA fund. My guess is these funds are going to be swept. And they have to be spent by 2026, I believe, at the latest. So we're into 2024. You guys know it usually takes a couple of years through consultant selection and all that process. That kind of puts that against the wall too. And if those funds are swept, then it's $6 million is appropriated out of account 1, 2, or 3 for this program. So you're going to have to set that money aside, given the ARPA language in there. So I just think this is premature.
Madam Chair, I just might make a couple comments based on what you mentioned, just to clear things up. So I agree. There's not specific criteria for redundancy projects. If we were to move forward with it, last year we used 50% grants. So if we were to move forward with it now, we'd be thinking along the same lines of what we've been thinking through our normal program. Another example might be if they're looking for a backup generator that runs a water treatment plant. Well, we don't fund water treatment plants. But if it was a backup generator that ran, so projects that aren't eligible under our program, and if it's something redundant for that, well, then it wouldn't be eligible under this. A general comment is my firm belief is $6 million is going to be a one and done deal. In 1 year, we'll have spent $6 million. Do we divvy it up 50-50 to the best 3 projects? Or do you, if you get 15 projects, do you equally divide it up so everybody gets a little? Whereas normally they're probably taking out loans for most of these types of projects. It might be a little beneficial, but it's not going to get them all the way there, obviously. So is it worth the effort and the brain damage, I guess, to come up with criteria for a one and done $6 million? Not that $6 million isn't a lot of money. And then, so I guess those are a couple of comments. And then you mentioned the ARPA. So the way I understand the legislation is that it is funding in account 1 and 2 or 3 that is freed up by ARPA replacement dollars. So it wouldn't have that ARPA tie. It would actually be account 1, 2, or 3 dollars. So for example, and I'm going to be talking about this here in a little bit. Let's see. Trying to think of a good project that's on the list. Say we have a project right now that's funded through our office, but it also has funds through Office of State Lands, through ARPA, through water and sewer, local government. It still has those ARPA funds, but now the governor's office can come in and let's say we had $1 million appropriated to that project. They can then replace our $1 million with ARPA funds. So now all the funding that the sponsor has is all ARPA money, and it freed up our $1 million to go back into our program to be used for something else. So that $1 million that got freed up is what would fund this. So it wouldn't have the ARPA tied to the December 2026 to be spent by.
So, Madam Chairman, and I would agree with that scenario right up until the ARPA funds aren't available. And the way I read the budget language is there is appropriated $6 million out of account 1, 2, or 3. So I still look at that. If those ARPA funds come available, you're absolutely correct. It would offset those. So that would replace those funds that are currently obligated. But if those ARPA funds don't come through, the way I read the language is that money is appropriated out of account 1, 2, or 3 for this redundancy. So it is,
yeah. If
ARPA comes through, it's great. But if it doesn't come through and it's not available, then it's going to come out of account 1, 2, or 3. Which even that language is tremendously problematic, to be taking money out of account 3 and putting it towards these type of projects. So,
Madam Chair, and that's where I would go back to our existing criteria, and it's not a dam or a reservoir, but that's an aside. Either way, it's coming from account 1, 2, or 3, regardless. So what I'm saying is it's not ARPA funds direct. So it wouldn't have that has to be spent by December 31st of 2026. Now, I agree. If we don't get the any ARPA funds back through the governor's office, then it's coming out of the program that we would use for all of our normal projects. And it still is, because any ARPA funds, replacement funds that free up dollars, we have a lot of need for those, way aside from redundancy projects, obviously. So anyway.
So, Madam Chairman, with that, how do you rank those then? All the other ones that are existing would get the ARPA funds, and these would only be a replacement if all of those other ongoing existing projects that we could replace with ARPA, or does this go to the front of the line for any of those? Yeah, that's what I thought.
Well, in my mind, it just says there's $6 million to go do this. So you shall go do this. Is the way I read that.
So it seems a little bit tricky because obviously Director, don't want to take the money out of 1, 2, and 3 just if we don't get the funds. So we're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. I don't know if Patrick has any thoughts on it for us, or if you have something maybe to help the commission sort of sort out what we should do.
Madam Chair, one more thing. I guess the way I read this is there is appropriated from water development accounts 1, 2, and 3 from monies previously obligated for projects that may be recaptured with current unobligated ARPA funds. So if we didn't get any ARPA funds through the governor's sweep, then I don't see how we would be obligated to go spend $6 million on redundancy. kind of read that as it's dependent on some ARPA funds coming back in, but
I guess my question, Director, would be, when do we know if these ARPA funds are coming our way or?
Madam Chair, so in a few minutes here, I'm going to be talking about that under discussion. We've been having conversations with the governor's office about what projects would be ripe for trying to replace some of those funds. So I think we have some things in the works. I would anticipate by this fall, when we took applications, if things worked out the way we hoped they would, we'd probably have that $6 million recaptured.
Commissioners, any thoughts, questions? Commissioner Cott?
I guess, in the discussion concerning, how do these redundancy projects fit in the priority of things? Money or not, ARPA funds or no ARPA funds would be, similar to our failing infrastructure. I mean, what's failing, what's life and limb type of money, what's the most important? Just like a thought.
Director, any further thoughts for us?
Yeah, Madam Chair, like I mentioned when we started, our rule of thumb is we don't fund redundancy because we can't afford that. We're busy taking care of all the needs rather than being able to fund once of a second one of the examples I gave you. So it wouldn't be something we normally do. The only reason we're having this discussion is the fact that this got put into the construction bill and now we have to do something with it.
Thank you, Commissioner Craig.
Lot of stuff being discussed, and I'm trying to kind of get a little bit of an idea. First, what's the possibility of having the $6 million? And it sounds to me like the likelihood is fairly high that that money will be available. So I'm going to put you on the spot, and I'm going to ask you how you would like to see it play out. I think there's just a lot of questioning in that timeline and in developing criteria or not developing criteria.
Director?
Madam Chair, I don't know if I want to give my opinion on how I'd like to see it play out. But
Madam Chair,
that-
can I throw him a lifeline?
Yes. Phone a friend.
We need to know how to proceed if we're going to make a decision as well, so.
Yeah, I think if I was directed to go put together criteria, that's not going to happen by November because there are a certain amount of days you got to go out for public comment and everything else. So you'd be pushing until next year to do that. And then at that point, you might as well go get it cleaned up at the next legislative session before we get going. Senator Hicks.
He
Senator
did
Hicks.
a masterful job of not answering the question.
Right.
Patrick, I guess I would ask you what your thoughts are, to kind of help us out in your legal opinion, since you've studied
Yeah.
this a little.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, and I think the safest approach is to get this thing cleaned up legislatively, and maybe in some special conditions in this legislation, we can, put some language in there saying that the commission is authorized to contract with entities that qualify as sponsors for the implementation of water redundancy projects. You could put something in there about criteria as well, or the need to develop criteria. Now, I'm saying this presuming that the funds aren't subject to the ARPA, the 2026 cutoff, and I agree with Jason. It doesn't. I don't believe they are based on how this is written, but maybe we need to have further discussions with the governor's office in regard to that and the expectation of when the $6 million is going to come down the pipeline as well.
Majority Floor Leader?
What's that? Oh, yeah, it's getting a little short on the stretch there. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I guess in discussions that we had is that the dollars had to be encumbered. They didn't have to be physically utilized by 26, but they had to be encumbered. And the discussions were that water projects fit under the ARPA designation. And that's what we knew, that we had projects that would be readily available that we could put that money into immediately and would be able to be utilized. The issue is if it's not encumbered, has an actual contract, that's the problem we're dealing with right now. There were 2 dates, had to know by March, basically, here a couple months ago on some of it, it's going to start sweeping, and then also in July. And so that was the idea, is that this was going to be, designated to a project that is underway or something like that, was the discussions that we had with the governor's office. And so that's why water became part of it. And because we have projects that are readily underway, they're operating right now or under contract. And so as far as the timeline is concerned, as long as the project has been bid or that it's there and it's available, then that money is tied up, it's encumbered, it's basically considered utilized. Now, as far as some of this right here, this was kind of, even right now, as I'm reading through this was evidently some kind of a late move that really wasn't evidently very well thought out. So to my way of looking at it, I would have to agree with your counsel, is that this needs to go back to legislature and be cleaned up. And it will still be able to work under that timeline, but it would probably be better than trying to put everybody through the hoops to force something to happen right quick, like to your point, Mr. Mead, that this is a one and done deal. That might even change between now and then. I mean, there's so much, this is so fluid. This is just dollars we're wanting to try to be utilized before they reverted back. And so that's why water was put in that. So my opinion, Madam Chairman, would be this does need to go back to legislature to be cleaned up and done properly.
Thank you, Majority Floor Leader. Any comments, Director?
Madam Chair, we keep talking about the ARPA and the governor's office. If you don't mind, what I was going to say for discussion, I could just cover now real quick in relationship to that. It might
That would
clear
be
a couple
great.
things up.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've been having conversations with the governor's office directly to what Representative Diamond's been discussing. And we've identified the projects. So a project has to have funding encumbered, which means under contract. So an agreement, if a sponsor has an agreement with us, that's considered encumbered. That's the feedback we've received from the accounting firm that's the expert in ARPA through the budget department. So we've identified there's 8 projects. Yeah, sorry, didn't hear what you said. I'm gonna let Bill hand you out a list of projects here real quick. So I already mentioned in the budget bill, it allows the governor to sweep funding and then redistribute that funding. So that's kind of the emphasis or the impetus of this. So the list you have in front of you is what we've kind of worked through the governor's office on. If you look at column number 4, it says awarded Osley ARPA funding. So 6 out of the 8 projects have funding through either water and sewer or the local government pool of ARPA funds that was provided in 22 and 23, maybe if I remember right, to individual entities. And then we've got the Laramie Northside Tank and the Guernsey Transmission Pipeline that don't have Osley funds, but they have SRF funds, which was kind of that litmus test to know if they were going to be eligible for ARPA. So they have the same requirements that a ARPA project, funded project would have. So we went down through this. The governor's office kind of gave us a number to shoot for. And when you add all these up, you see in the far right column, the running total is $23.5 million. So we feel pretty comfortable with these projects that they're either, if it's through state lands also has something in rule that says if they're not under construction contract by October 1, they don't meet state land's definition of encumbered. So the ones that have the yeses in that awarded through state lands, we feel like we're pretty comfortable that they're going to meet that deadline. We've talked to all these sponsors to make sure it's okay to, if they either have ARPA dollars and they have water development match dollars, that we replace those water development match dollars with ARPA dollars now. And then the other two that have SRF funding, everybody's fine with that. All we need to do is get authority from the commission and select water committee to go in, amend their agreement. We would basically remove water development funding from the source of funding and insert ARPA funding, no different than we did. We had 4 projects back in 2022. So we've got kind of the template of the language that needs to be in there. And then in addition to our normal funding agreements, it adds a little bit of reporting and potential audit language that goes along with the ARPA funding. And again, they're already subject to this. All these projects are, because of either having SRF or already having ARPA funding. So that's not really an issue. So, and I'm hoping tomorrow we can get your approval upon putting together what that amendment is and getting it through the AG's review, that we could get your approval again upon AG's approval of the amendment to go ahead and move those through. And then when they're signed by the AG's office, we'd send them out to the folks on the Water Development Commission, need to sign them, and then on to the sponsor and get them signed. And we'd be ready to, they'd have to get set up in the portal for a few more dollars through the budget department. And then we'd be ready to basically start replacing that money, ARPA money, instead of water development money. And the reason I'm asking for this or bringing this up today is because it's somewhat urgent, because all these projects are active projects. So every month that goes by, we're drawing down funds that could have been replaced with ARPA funds. And this is all, within the last several weeks of conversations with the governor's office. So are there any questions on that, what we're trying to accomplish here?
Director?
Yeah.
I have a question first, and then we can see who else does. But basically what you're saying is, okay, there's funding that could be recaptured, for example, on the Cheyenne Transmission Pump Station of 6 million plus. Why amend all the contracts? Would it be, if it's just money dollar for dollar, you don't have to do one amendment there. You say, okay, we're going to just take $6 million and replace it with the 6 million of ARPA and be done. Or were you suggesting that we do it, proportionately to however much money they have, and what would be the reason to do that? I'm just trying to figure out what the plan is.
Yeah. So Madam Chair, I should walk you through this. The second column is what the original appropriation for each one of those projects was from water development. Again, these are active projects. So as of May 1st, this is what has been that is unspent of water development funds. So it's the active balance that could be replaced by ARPA. So then that same dollar amount, if you move over to the second to last column, is the potential Water Development Commission funding recaptured. That is the same dollar amount as in column 3. So it's not like we're going to replace less. It's just the water development funds have already been spent because there's an active construction project going on. We've received invoices, reimbursed the sponsor, things like that. So, and then if you add all those up, that comes to, if we can get all this done, that's $23.5 million in account 1 and 2. Most of it's account 1. I think the last 2, Wheatland and Salt Creek, are account 2 projects, would be freed up in those 2 accounts for projects next year or projects this fall that we see coming in.
I understand,
That
but 23 million, we only have $6 million of this ARPA money that we're going to use. Is that correct? Or
Madam Chair, the redundancy language that we just was talking about, yes, we have this, you shall go do redundancy projects. So once we got 6 million recouped, then technically we would be in the clear to go take an application on a redundancy project, up to $6 million spending it. The other, whatever that balance would be, $17 million is just back into our accounts for future projects.
Any further questions by the commission? Select water.
Okay, so Madam Chair, tomorrow, when we get down to the other items requiring action, then I'll ask you to give us approval to move forward and amend those agreements. And if I get a favorable response, then we'll get those amendments ready and sent to the AG's office and then out for signature and as quickly as possible and into the system and keep working with the governor's office.
Commissioner Craig?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director, I want to make sure I'm clear. By being able to do this, it will free this money will come back to the commission, back into our accounts, and we will not have to deal with those timelines that ARPA, that time constraint, is that correct?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Craig, that is correct. These are all projects we expect will get done before December 26th. They'll all be ARPA dollars. That'll help Wyoming spend its ARPA dollars. And then the money that we already had appropriated for those projects will then become unappropriated and available for other projects through just our normal account 1, 2, 3 money.
Okay.
1 and 2 in this case, but yeah.
So with that in mind, it seems like a proper way to move forward for our benefit and for our benefit of the program. As far as discussion tomorrow, we will need a motion on that. I would ask that maybe we would have some language for that motion as well.
Yep.
So we'd have, will you draft that or Jason, or have Patrick draft that?
Madam Chair, I will.
Okay, thank you. Just because it seems fairly technical and I don't want to, since it's confusing, I'd like it to be a little tighter than our usual motions. Thanks, Patrick.
Yeah.
That all for that, Director Mead?
Madam Chair, I believe so.
Okay. Thank you. And so we will continue on to Alkali Creek. And are you addressing that for us, Director?
Madam Chair, I'll get us started. Give me just a second here to get caught up.
I did, Director, on the redundancy, I did wanted, and I spoke with you earlier. I just wanted to mention that in the governor's letter, he sort of indicated that he wanted, I think he sort of was saying, well, why don't you all tell us that you're allocating these funds proportionately across the state and equally and equitably, or else give further training. Do you think we need to address anything to the governor regarding that language?
Madam Chair, I'll revisit that letter. It's been a few months since I've actually read all the details. We put that in here because of a minor error in a reference in that redundancy language. And so I'll read back through that and work with the governor's office on anything we might need to do.
Thank you, Director.
Okay. Megan, I think we have
We'd like to welcome Representative Summers to our group. Thanks.
Megan, do we have a?
Can you hear us okay? Thank you.
Okay. We have an Alkali Creek presentation that you can bring up. And then I would invite whoever from Tri-Hydro is going to give the majority of the presentation up. So just a little intro. Wanted to give you an update on the Alkali Creek Reservoir project. And I know most everybody I think is familiar with the project, but it's kind of got a long history. This started back in 2007 with particular landowner Cecil Mullins, who's since gone to heaven. That was seeing the Nowood River dry up and wanted to figure out a way where we could capture that early spring runoff and actually put it to use when the river went dry. And so at the time we met with a bunch of folks over in that community, and it stands out in my mind that everybody was pulling out $20 bills by the time we got done to come up with the $1,000 application fee to go do a watershed study. I think that's interesting. I've not seen that before. But And then that turned into pulling together a steering committee that, you know, really represented the entire watershed because it was a large watershed that we were looking at in that level 1 study. This is just really the process we go through for dams and reservoirs. And we followed this process for Alkali Creek and the different levels and phases. Like I said, we started off with a watershed study. We then go into feasibility analysis to determine, is there really a need for water? We look at alternatives. We kind of narrow it down to a preferred alternative based on all the good things that go into a good reservoir site, plus all the considerations for, can you go get this permitted through the federal government? And then when you narrow in on that, then you start looking at, okay, let's go out and start punching holes in the ground to understand the subsurface geology and make sure we don't have problems there, and doing wetland delineations and different things, so more costly things that are on the ground. And then we get to permitting. And when you see phase 3 down there, that's permitting and design. So a general timeline. This isn't working. Megan, can you advance to the next slide? Okay, so I know that's pretty small, but for the most part, like I said, we started in 2007. We did the level 1, level 2, level 3, all those, or different phases of level 2s. And we started NEPA in 2017. By 2020, 2021, we had favorable records of decision from the Bureau of Land Management, which this property that reservoir would be built on involves their property. So we needed a right-of-way permit. And then, of course, a 404 permit through the Corps of Engineers. So we got all that stuff in place in 2020, 21 kind of time frame, and then started into the design of the project. And we're about 50% into the design at this point and needing to acquire easements. And we all kind of have heard about that over the last several months. So Mark Donner is with Tri-Hydro. They've been the longtime engineering consultant on this project. They were a sub, I think, during the watershed study initially, and then they kind of took over the lead when we got into the more technical feasibility analysis, and they've been great to work with. So they're going to kind of walk you through the history, bring you up to speed on what the issues were. And the main update today is, was looking at the Anita ditch and the ability to put that into a pipe. Is it feasible? How much would it cost? What are their advantages, disadvantages? So we can kind of get some feedback on, okay, if we're going to keep going down this road or if there's a different path we need to take. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mark.
Welcome, Mr. Donner.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I think you're just going to have to say next slide.
Megan, if you can just go to the next slide. So we're going to provide a little bit of a background on the project for those that aren't familiar with it. I know we've presented on this a few times. So some of you are probably pretty familiar with it. Others, this may be the first time you're learning about it. So just in terms of location, the proposed reservoirs in the Nowood River watershed. So that's east or the western flank of the Bighorns, located by Hyattville. And the purpose of the project is to supplement late season irrigation water, reduce irrigation shortages by capturing early season flows, storing that, and then allowing us to release that later in the season to help out with those irrigation shortages. There's some secondary benefits with this project as well. There'll be, because of the public funding, there'll be recreation aspects built into it, some flat water recreation. We think there'll also be some water quality benefits as well as some minimal flood reduction benefits. Jason mentioned the studies that we've been through. So this project, the Alkali Creek project, comes through a series of studies that were performed in the Nowood River watershed, looking at different storage opportunities up there, evaluating what level of storage do we need, what is the need there, and what alternatives may meet that need. So went through a rigorous evaluation, looked at about 40 different alternative sites up there, and worked our way down to Alkali Creek being the preferred alternative. Variety of screening criteria go into that. Storage capability of the different sites, what the hydrology is there enough water to support that? Technical issues, is the geology okay? What kind of geotechnical conditions are we going to have? Landowner pieces definitely come into that as well. So going through that again, we ended up at Alkali Creek. There has been some questions we've gone through this. Why didn't we look at one of the other sites up above Alkali Creek a little more closely. And so if you look at that map, it's kind of tough to see. Alkali Creek is the green dot kind of on the upper portion of that. And there's some other sites that are to the right of that. So that's upstream in the Paint Rock Creek watershed. And there's a variety of things that came up with each of those sites. There were some key geotechnical concerns with a few of those. There are also some fairly significant potential environmental impacts tied with those, as well as reduced hydrology for some of those. So that's really what pushed us down to Alkali Creek, which unfortunately limits some of the direct benefits that you would get if you could move upstream. But again, it just, those sites really just couldn't make it through the screening criteria. Alkali Creek was moved forward for a variety of reasons. One, fairly minimal environmental impacts associated with that site where it sits. We had some existing irrigation ditches that we felt we could use to convey the water we needed to fill that reservoir. And also the primary landowner that was affected by that site was generally favorable to the project. So that's one of the reasons, or a variety of reasons why that project moved forward. In terms of service area, this is the way it lays out there. So we have Alkali Creek shown up there. It's on Alkali Creek, which is a tributary to Paint Rock Creek, which in turn is a main tributary to the Nowood River. So the reservoir would serve directly lands downstream along Alkali Creek, Paint Rock Creek, and the lower Nowood River. And then by exchange, you can also serve lands up Paint Rock Creek, further up in the Paint Rock Creek watershed, and then up the main stem of the Nowood.
There's a point around that if you need it.
Okay.
It's that red thing right there.
Okay, thanks. And then in terms of just acres served, it's about 13,000 acres is what the reservoir would serve. And then the other thing to highlight in here, if I can, there's some bottom. Oh, there you go. My bad.
That's not right. What are you trying to do?
I was going to point up. That's all right.
Yeah, this thing here. No, it's not working.
Okay. Well, if you see, it's kind of tough to see, but there's a yellow outline on there. That yellow outline represents the boundaries of the Nowood Watershed Improvement District. That district was formed during the development of this project, and they're the project sponsors. And we have some numbers up there, but it's about 43,000 acres is what's included in that Watershed Improvement District boundary. This figure provides an overall layout of the project and the main components. So again, we have the reservoir that's located on Alkali Creek. The reservoir will capture spring runoff on Alkali Creek, but primarily it's going to be filled from diversions from Medicine Lodge Creek and Paint Rock Creek. And that would be filled via diversions through the Anita Ditch and the Anita Supplemental Ditch. Up until about this point of the project, the plan has been that we would be enlarging those historic ditches. One of the reasons we're here talking to you today is discussions and considering actually piping that as opposed to enlarging those ditches, which is something that's been expressed by as an interest of a number of the landowners up there. A couple other things to point out on here. Jason mentioned some of the permits. So the project, the reservoir itself is located partially on private lands and partially on BLM lands. So our primary federal permit that we needed to get was a right-of-way permit for the BLM. That is something that was obtained again back in 2020 timeframe. And then the rest of the project is located on private lands, including the Anita Ditch and the Anita Supplemental Ditch. Give you a better perspective on conceptually what the reservoir would look like. So again, the main embankment is across Alkali Creek. It's a zoned earthen embankment is the proposal. It's about 2,500 feet long, 100 feet high. We would impound about 8,900 acre feet. 6,000 acres of roughly would be in the would go into the active irrigation pool. And then the other 2,900 acre feet approximately is tied to conservation pools for the reservoir. As you're looking at that, you can see we have at the bottom of it, we have the Anita Ditch coming in. So that would be the main supply for that. Goes through a series of mitigation wetlands. And then our discharges from the reservoir would go into the Anita Ditch and also into Alkali Creek. And that's what would be distributed downstream for our other users. The other thing to point out, we do have some public recreation areas tied into this. So at the upper portion of that, which is the west part of the project, we have a public access road that goes into parking area, boat ramp to support some flat water recreation for the site. look a little more specifically at the ditches. So the Anita ditch, which has a priority date of 1896, that diverts water from Medicine Lodge Creek currently. And as you can see, that ditch, which is that kind of orange line on there, that flows through the footprint of the reservoir. So we'd be using that to convey flows into the reservoir. And again, from the reservoir, we would then drop flows back out into either the Anita ditch or to Alkali Creek. So it could be distributed lower into the watershed. One note we do, there's a blue line. I don't think we'll get that
It's
to
still
work,
not
but,
working.
there's a blue line that runs right above the highway there, south of the reservoir. That's a bypass pipeline. So the plan is we'd be putting in what we call the Anita Ditch bypass pipeline. That would go in to help us during construction, so we can bypass those irrigation flows while we're constructing the reservoir. It would then remain after the reservoir is built, and provide us some operational flexibility. Or if we needed to do repairs to the reservoir again, we could then route those irrigation flows around the reservoir. Zooming in a little closer to the Anita supplemental ditch. So the way that we would plan for the project to operate is primary diversions are going to come off of Medicine Lodge Creek. So when Medicine Lodge Creek is in flood stage, that's where we're going to be pulling most of our flows. But of the two creeks, Medicine Lodge Creek is a little bit smaller. So as that recedes, we would then augment that flow with flows diverted from Paint Rock Creek via the Anita supplemental ditch, which that's a 1904 priority date on that ditch. And again, conceptually to this point, our plan has been that we'd be looking at enlargements to those ditches so that we can convey both the reservoir filling flows as well as the irrigation flows that are currently allocated to those ditches. And under consideration now is whether we would look at piping those ditches instead of enlarging them. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about where we do and where we don't have easements. So this is a little different perspective of the reservoir. This is looking from upstream, downstream, so looking kind of from the north to the south. And you can see the two center pivots there at what would be the north end of that on the left side of the slide there. That's an upper landowner that we don't currently have an easement from. So you can see the reservoir, that blue outline there is a normal high water line. And as we get close to those center pivots, we are basically just impounding water up that incised Alkali Creek. It's about 15 to 20 feet of an incised channel in there. So we're just backing up to there. The original design included constructing what we were calling an access control berm. Basically a berm with some culverts through it, with the idea being just preventing those recreators from being able to trespass up that arm of Alkali Creek onto that upper property. What's under consideration currently that we've had some discussions with the landowner about is actually constructing a controlled outlet embankment and then operating that small pool upstream of that embankment as a separate pool, thereby providing some additional benefits to those landowners to offset some of the impacts. That increases the project cost, which we'll talk to in a few slides, as well as puts some additional operational burden on the district. So there's some alternatives there, but they come with increased costs, but they may help us work through obtaining the easement for that upper area. Looking at the overall project area, if we look at the area in green, those are the project areas where we have obtained either easements or we've purchased property for those areas. That includes the main embankment area, the reservoir pool area, except for that upper area that we were talking about. Our borrow areas, our staging areas, a lot of our construction access roads, and then about 86% of the Anita ditch. The areas you see in white are those areas that are still outstanding that we haven't secured easements for. So the upper end of the reservoir where it backs up Alkali Creek, the lower portion of Alkali Creek just above its confluence with Paint Rock Creek, and then areas around the head gate for the Anita ditch, and then most of the Anita supplemental ditch as well. The other thing we have shown on there, that blue line, is just conceptually just to give you an idea. If we were going to put this in a pipeline, we would of course try to straighten that as much as we can to limit the length of pipe. So conceptually, we'd be cutting off a fairly large bend in the Anita ditch. We would of course have to get easements for that portion where we'd be going outside of the Anita ditch alignment. we did want to talk a little bit, just history of easements and that process. That question has come up in the past about the timing on that. We have had discussions with landowners throughout the development of this project. So going back again to the watershed study in 2007 through the development of the storage evaluation studies and on through final design. We really kicked off discussions with the affected landowners that were directly impacted by the project in 2018. So in April of 2018, after getting the design contract set up, we had meetings with each of those landowners up there. The chairman of the Watershed Improvement District participated in those meetings to give them an idea of what was coming. We then worked on the design. There were some geotechnical issues, which some of you may remember us working through, delayed the project a little bit. And then we worked through developing about 30% designs and then went back to landowners starting in spring of 2021. Once we had an idea of the actual areas that we were going to need easements for. And so started discussions with landowners then. That continued through spring of 2023. At that point, we were still, we'd secured a lot of the lands, those that you see up there now, but we're still struggling to come to agreements with many of the landowners. And at that point, several of those landowners had reached out to members of the commission and the Select Water Committee. And so many of you were involved with discussions last spring. Couple of things that we've been holding up some of the landowners that we're still negotiating with. We had several of them that weren't interested in talking with us until we had secured the easements and the property for the primary reservoir area. They viewed that as a pretty big hurdle and weren't sure we would get through it. We were able to work through that. We still had some landowners at that point that said, hey, we still aren't interested in talking to you until you have everybody else taken care of. And then we do have some landowners that are opposed to the project, and they have been frustrated with the project process as well. So that's kind of what we're working through right now. In response to the discussions last spring, which again several of you were involved with, there was a recommendation to work through mediation with those outstanding landowners using the Department of Ag's mediation program. So we reached out to that in the fall of 2023. The Millwood Watershed Improvement District requested mediation through that program. Program in turn reached out to some of the affected landowners, and we had 3 landowners that agreed to meet and go through mediation. Those meetings occurred in Worland in November of 2023. And with that, Jason, I'm actually going to turn it over to Derek now. He'll walk us through some of the reservoir or some of the pipeline discussions. One of the key outcomes of those mediation discussions was an interest in converting the ditches to pipelines, which again comes with a notable cost. So I'll hand it over to Derek and he'll walk you through that.
Mr. Thompson, come on up.
All right, well, thank you. I'm Derek Thompson with Tri-Hydro. Like Mark was saying, we did have mediation meetings back in November 2023. In attendance at that was representatives from Tri-Hydro, Water Development, Millwood Watershed Improvement District, and board members, as well as the mediators and 3 different landowners. From that, several different requests were made by landowners. It was anywhere from access to water rights to easement payments, but kind of the overarching big one there is that each of them had agreed that if the ditch was put into a pipe, they would be amenable to signing easements. And so that's kind of where we're at in today's world. Let me go to the next slide.
You can control there with the arrow to the right.
So like Mark said, with those mediation meetings, we had went into looking at, well, what is it going to take to convert that ditch to a pipe? I will say that this is not the first time that this idea or this discussion has come up. We did look at this option real early in the project. At that time, costs were prohibitive, so we stuck with the enlargements. However, to get the remaining easements in place, this has come back up. And so we put more thought into the design, what was needed, working with the Anita Ditch Company, who owns and operates the Anita Ditch. And that is the design that was prepared, or the preliminary design is what is shown in the e-notebook. There is a detailed memo in there just behind the design criteria, results of what would be required for that design and costs. Just kind of briefly summarizing where we came to, we evaluated everything from one large pipe all the way down to 3 different pipes. And the difficulty with this ditch is it's just under 4 miles long to get to the reservoir. It's very flat. There have been issues with some of the Trex structures there, checking water up, becoming stagnant, moss growing, and so forth. So maintenance is a challenge, which also results in challenges with the ditch to pipe. What we had found kind of optimizing the design is a 2 pipe design option. One would be a 48-inch pipe, which would just convey irrigation flows and to the turnouts that are there currently. There's 5 between the head gate and the reservoir itself. And then a second pipeline, which would be a 54-inch pipeline that would just convey reservoir flows. The reservoir pipeline would be for 70 CFS. The other one would be up to 45 CFS. So we have a range of flows that we got to be able to convey from Medicine Lodge all the way to the reservoir itself. We also, within that memo, have some cost estimates for the need of supplemental if that was put into a ditch, or sorry, into a pipe. However, we didn't put as much effort or thought into that design itself, just because it's kind of been off the table here recently, and primary focus has been, let's get water to the reservoir through the needed ditch. Sorry. I'll also say that the pipeline largely does follow the existing ditch itself. So it'd be just placed in the bottom, likely widened in some areas and backfilled over the top, except for that one location that Mark had shown with that blue line that cuts off a majority of a big loop within the ditch itself. That's actually on a landowner's property that does not have any turnouts out of the ditch itself. So pros with the conversion is we would be able to cut off about 4,600 feet of the existing ditch. That does help with costs. Costs are a major driver with this conversion, and largely why we're here today giving an update. Other things that landowners were interested in was converting lands that were currently that existing ditch. They do want to put those into production, so they do want to be able to farm over this pipeline. The conversion would conserve water, eliminating seepage as well as evaporation, which is a major driver for outside funding. So another pro to that project. I will also say reduces maintenance just associated with the ditch itself. So right now, the Needed Ditch Company does go out with an excavator, cleans certain sections of the ditch every year. Like I said, they're having to do moss treatment because of the water and just how flat the ditch is currently. And then there is constraints just with the prescriptive easement and some of the landowners maybe not understanding that fully of what can be cleaned. So there have been some issues just with maintenance. Putting it into a pipe maybe gets rid of some of those issues. On the flip side, some cons, and I will say that all these pros and cons are also listed out in section 3 of that memo. So if you want additional detail, take a look at that. But the maintenance complexity would change putting this into a pipe. Like I said, currently cleaned out just with an excavator. Debris, if it was stuck in there or if sediment was caught in there, largely would be taken out, either snaking the pipe or taken out at some of the manholes where the turnouts are. Costs are the big driver, which I'll talk to you kind of the next few slides. This ditch does have livestock watering that does occur during the winter months. A lot of the different operations use this kind of as wintering grounds around it. Like I said, just design challenges with the range of flows, everywhere from 10 CFS all the way up to that 120, and just how we're going to design that into the conversion itself. We put on there mitigation for fringe wetlands. The last few years, we've kind of gone back and forth with this one. Largely that was due to the waters of the US and jurisdictional wetlands and kind of the back and forth with where that was going with ditches itself. Which still a consideration, although ditches are largely not waters of the US. But if that was to ever come back again, there are wetlands that are along this ditch due to seepage from it. And so it's something we need to take into consideration. I will say the conversion to a pipe is not a solve all issues with the project itself. Some of these landowners are still requesting easement payments on top of the conversion itself, or other things like livestock watering within the ditch itself. And then a large one there, just pipeline ownership. So right now, like I said, the Anita Ditch is owned and operated by the Anita Ditch Company. The Watershed Improvement District is a shareholder within the ditch itself. But with the amount of money that would be going towards converting the pipe or converting the ditch to pipe, there would be some considerations of, well, does the Anita Ditch continue to own that ditch? Should the improvement district own the ditch? Should the state own the ditch? So just discussions that will need to be had. So here's the fun part with just the cost estimates themselves. I will say that this table looks probably a little bit different than what is in the memo itself. There was some way that the numbers were being presented, but just going to point out that pre-construction costs for that design and permitting were pulled out and stuck up there at the top. But the big numbers just to be aware of is just construction subtotal. So the first column is our 60% design costs that are updated to 2024 dollars. And then the second column there is costs associated with converting the ditch to pipe, as well as that control embankment that Mark was talking about at the upper end of the reservoir. And the big driver in the cost is the conversion from the open ditch to pipe would be about $22 million on the construction side. Factoring in easements, engineering, contingencies, that cost does rise. I will say the numbers that are shown here are assuming that the conversion from ditch to pipe is an in-kind contribution and we're not having to go out and get any more easements. So that easement number doesn't change between the two at this current time, but that is one that could potentially change. Along with just the increase in construction costs, routine O&M, including flushing, dewatering, inspection of that pipe. We're anticipating it'll be comparable to what is currently going on with the Anita Ditch itself. However, there will be more operation and maintenance costs associated with that control embankment at the upper end. Like I said, we don't anticipate the O&M changing much. However, the Anita Ditch Company's role in that O&M could change if converting to a pipe. Maybe the improvement district does take on a larger role with that. Replacement costs also increase due to just additional valving, piping, vaults that may be needed. Also dredging of that embankment on Alkali Creek, assuming that the improvement district takes on the O&M for it. These replacement costs are addressed through a sinking fund or matched with outside funding. The sinking fund for replacement costs would go up, resulting in more money needed to be saved month to month. Back in 2016, the improvement district did establish a price for shares within the reservoir. That would need to be relooked at because likely that current assessment wouldn't cover what is needed for the sinking fund. This is not in the memo, but through the last several years, we've been updating the benefit cost ratio analysis for various things since the 60% design. And what we're seeing here, same thing. The first column is what the 60% design benefit cost ratio would be. The second column is what would it be if we converted to a pipe. The direct and indirect benefits don't change. The direct construction benefits would change just because of the additional costs associated with the pipe. But overall, we're seeing, that the benefit cost ratio is still above a 1 with the conversion to a pipe. However, as you can see, that starts dropping down and getting closer to 1. So this is telling us benefits still outweigh the cost of that conversion. Director Mark, would you like to add anything to that analysis?
I would add just one thing, or maybe a couple quick things. So one of them is when we look at construction costs and how much we can grant towards a project, our criteria says we can go up to 100% not to exceed the public benefit of a project. And if you look, if I can find it here, do we have public benefit on this one? Don't. Okay, so the public benefit, when we add those up, and that would be, so the direct benefit is the additional yield on the crop that they're going to gain by having this additional late season water. And then the indirect benefit of that, Farmer Joe gets this dollar in his pocket, he's going to go out and buy more seed or a truck or go to the hamburger joint a few more times. So it's the effect that has in the community, in the region, the state. That's part of the public benefit. Of course, we have recreational benefits because we have the conservation pool for fishing and boating that are part of that. And then, as Derek mentioned, a little bit of construction benefit that we would see that could potentially be local. So with the not converting to pipe option the way it was originally proposed, the public benefit was roughly $100 million. And when we were looking at a cost of 83 million or 84 million down at the bottom in that second column to complete the project, well, then that public benefit really wasn't a limiting factor on what could be considered grant dollars and what can be considered loan dollars, because theoretically you could go to 100% of 84 million and not exceed the public benefit of $100 million. When you add in another $30 million pipeline, that changes a bit. And the public benefit now is 104 to 105 million. And the only reason that changed, we haven't taken any public benefit or analyzed what the public benefit of the pipe would be, but because that construction cost went up a little bit, that's part of the public benefit change. So 104 or 5 million, the overall cost of the project now is, 113 million in today's dollars. So when we started this whole discussion, we were at that $24, $25 an acre foot, and that equated to a $2.1 million loan. So we exceed the public benefit if we are maintaining a $2.1 million loan and having to come up with the difference of $113 million because the public benefit's only $104, $105 million. So that's one thing to consider. However, we have some language in our criteria that really discusses wetland mitigation, for example, or environmental mitigation, I think is what it says. So by putting that conservation pool in or the cost of wetlands, that's a project requirement that the sponsor shouldn't be strapped with because it's just part of doing business to get this project done. And in my mind, I don't think the sponsors of the project initially wanted to look at putting the ditch into pipe. That's something that has come up as a requirement potentially here to get to agreements on easements and keeping the project going forward. So I almost consider that mitigation in a sense. So is that all, really, or, do you look at it where you just remove that $30 million as, really a cost to the project sponsor or not? How do we look at that? There are some water quality benefits to it. The Paint Rock Creek is on the 303D list for impairment for E. coli. This should improve water quality. It's going to benefit those landowners up there with ability to get, additional lands under production that are outside the project beneficiary. So there's public benefit, but I also see this as mitigation in a sense to try to get the project moving forward based on landowner requests. So I wanted to point that out. In addition to that, as Derek mentioned, that even at $2.1 million now, if we were thinking about the cost of the pipe and that sinking fund that they're going to want to be thinking about every year, because eventually, say 30, 40, 50 years down the road, they may need to replace this pipe now. Well, then that increases your annual operation and maintenance, set aside funding type costs. So if we're going to, again, stick back to what's affordable and makes sense for this district, that's in that $24, $25 range. Then we're also talking about that particular loan of $2.1 million where the construction cost might have to start coming down to compensate for the additional operation and maintenance and replacement costs that go along with the pipe. So I wanted to just point that out because it's a consideration that's going to need to be looked at some point, and a decision need to be made by the commission and the select water committee.
I got one more here, just related to outside funding. So during the 2020 session, additional money was allocated for this project. It now totals for construction $59 million that are allocated for the Alkali Creek Reservoir project. Since that time, inflation and everything else, costs have increased. So we've known for the last few years that additional money was going to be needed for the project. Several different programs have been applied for through the district themselves. So Bureau of Reclamation Small Water Program was applied for in 2022. We put together a feasibility study and a grant application for that. Unfortunately, the project was denied because of concerns with just economics and then the non-federal contribution to the project. We can resubmit to that program, but as I'll talk about just with hurdles, chances aren't as high as maybe some of the other programs. We have also recently submitted to the NRCS PL 566 or the Watershed Protection and Flood Prevention Program. A preliminary letter was submitted in March of this year. Applications for that program close on March 17th, so a decision has not been made, but staying in contact with NRCS. Others that have been brought up, clean water SRF funds, we have talked to them. Typically, those funds are reserved for, at least for reservoirs, for public water systems. Lately, that program has been changing what they are funding. However, with this project, because we're looking at the ditch to pipe that does improve water quality, they would potentially consider funding a portion of the project, primarily just the pipeline itself. So some more discussions need to be had with that program just to see what can and cannot be funded through this project. As part of our contract, 319 funds, that's just a voluntary projects from landowners. We did bring that up in discussions when we were going through easements and negotiations with landowners themselves. We really didn't get a lot of interest during those discussions, but they are funds that are being looked at. There are other programs as well that are being just followed, or like the Water Smart grants through reclamation. There's smaller grant programs like the Wildlife Foundation. However, those aren't at big dollars like Bureau of Rec or NRCS. As for hurdles, those federal dollars often come with a tie to having to open up NEPA. Like Jason said, we do have a record of decision, a 404 permit with this project. Say we were to get Bureau of Reclamation or NRCS over a certain dollar amount, it could open back up to NEPA. It may be a smaller NEPA process, but it does give an opportunity to open the project back up to public comment. With that, additional time for is put forth to applying to a lot of these programs. Also, if we did get federal dollars and we had to go through NEPA, that's another 2 to 3 years delay, which, as we've seen the last few years, costs just continue to rise. We have seen that these grants are very competitive. This is not the only program or project chasing these program dollars. And type of beneficiaries, like Jason said, a lot of this is ag is the major driver of the benefit for it. However, there's also recreation and fisheries. But some of the other projects that we've been seeing through these grant programs are also tied, to municipal water or hydropower or other beneficiaries in addition to just ag. So ranking wise, the Alkali project is ranked lower than some of the others, that may be in California or other places in the West that have a larger beneficiary group. So with that, that's all I've got for slides. And
Madam Chair, I'd like to, we've had a number of the Norwood Watershed Improvement District or the project proponent make their way down to Cheyenne today from up in the Hyattville country. So I'd like them to come up and introduce themselves and kind of bring them into this conversation, and then we'd be happy to answer any questions. Really what I'm looking for is just some feedback, direction that if I don't hear any negative feedback, we're going to keep going down this road of thinking, okay, we're going to consider putting this ditch in the pipe and go back to our easements, our landowners that we need to discuss easements with and have more conversations with them and see if we can't get easements in place. So with that, if I'd ask.
Chairman, before we do that, I've got a couple technical questions for Derek. And so,
All right, Senator Hicks first, then we'll welcome the public up. And when you do come up, just state your name clearly for us and where you're from. But go ahead, Senator Hicks.
so Derek, when I look at your platted surveys, the average fall on the Anita ditch is about 0.1%. And so it's pretty damn flat. And so typically the size of the pipe is dictated by the slope, right? So was there any thoughts of looking to move the point of diversion up to gain some elevation to reduce the size of the pipe and see if there was any offset there that was to be gained from a substantial. And so you look at the length of the ditch, you change the slope, takes a lot smaller pipe because you increase velocities. Was that looked at all and what that would take and how far upstream you would have to go, and then the additional cost of that pipe, even though it would be smaller pipe? Was there any look at that at all?
Madam Chair, Senator Hicks, yeah, we did look at moving that point of diversion upstream. The difficulty, and if you'd like, I could pull the map back up, but Medicine Lodge, well, the Anita Supplemental comes in just upstream of Medicine Lodge. And in order to gain enough fall to use a smaller pipeline, we'd have to go quite a ways. I don't remember the distance exactly. However, that landowner is also part of that Anita Supplemental ditch that we're having issues getting easements, or I wouldn't say they are for the project itself. And so we ran into landowner issues by trying to move that point of diversion upstream. Ideally, yes, we would like to do that because of where it's located now. You do have 2 county road bridges right there. And if we can move it upstream, we get rid of those bridges and impacts that could happen if diverting water through the Anita ditch. So yes, it has been looked at. However, landowner issues have made us stick to where the current point of diversion is at.
Yeah, and Madam Chairman, just to follow up, so not knowing the land ownership, I'm aware of the landowner you're talking about. How far up Paint Rock Creek do they go? Can you go above them? Basically, you just have to recreate this Anita Supplemental over to Medicine Lodge Creek, and then you could use the same from there, pick up a point of diversion upstream there. So is it miles, or is it a half a mile, or is it a lot? And then the distance.
I don't remember the distance exactly, but yes, we did go upstream of the Anita Supplemental on Paint Rock Creek, and that would be a new ditch or a new pipeline across a landowner that he said, yeah, I'd be open to the idea, but we have not pursued trying to get another point of diversion or additional pipeline and ditch within that area. Mark, I don't know if you remember how far upstream that was. It's not miles.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Senator Hicks, we would have to we could bring up the slides to show that. But again, there is a location where we could move it to. You're impacting a brand new landowner that why they may be willing to talk with us about, they definitely were cold to the idea. One of the benefits, if we move that up there, there's some additional cost with that as well, but a benefit is you could potentially get above the Harmony ditch, or Highland ditch, sorry. You get above the Highland ditch, which does open up some additional direct beneficiaries potentially, although some of those folks aren't currently shareholders in the reservoir. So there's the ability to do that. It's
So
just,
that
again,
would
we get
potentially
into
add additional contributing landowners, because the next question we're going to get into is the ability to pay cost per acre. So there's some economic offsets associated with that. Would that be an accurate characterization?
yes.
Madam,
Senator Hicks, do you have further questions?
No, I just, it's the flatness of the ditch that drives the size of the pipe, which drives the cost. And just before we just bail in, I'd just like to see at least a level 1 cursory study of looking at the hydrology and pipe size and some of these other. I want to make sure that we've crossed all the T's and looked at all the opportunities associated with the cost drivers here, which right now is the pipe.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Suker?
I have a couple questions, I guess. That pipe, have we considered any lining in that canal, or concrete lining, or any other type of PVC type lining that might be feasible? Or the ditch is there, right? Have you
Madam Chair.
considered any of that rather than the pipe?
Yes, Madam Chair, Commissioner Suker. Yeah, we did. Within the 60% design, there are several sections within the ditch that do have a clay liner in it. Largely that's dealing with the seepage issues. There's a section that seeps down into a neighboring landowner's house. There's also one along kind of where there's a gravel pit or a mine at the moment. So we did look at those liner systems. They were discussed with the landowners during the negotiations. However, they still would like a pipe, and that's largely so they can farm over the top and prevent, they are worried that during ditch cleaning or annual cleanings that we could puncture that liner as well. So
Well, I wouldn't think there would be a lot of cleaning if it was some type of liner, that water should flow. And if they got a grate on the outlet side, they shouldn't have a lot of debris in that ditch, I wouldn't think. But anyway, you have considered it. The other item would be, is there any feasible source of energy that could come off of this reservoir?
Madam Chair, Commissioner, it's not something that was evaluated specifically during the project. There's always those considerations. There is significant permitting that goes along with that process. And Jason, Director, I don't know if you'd have anything to add to that, but it has not been a real consideration during the project.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Commissioner Sucre, the only thing that we've seen in the past is when we're only looking at seasonal, the ability to seasonally put water through a hydropower turbine, it doesn't have the year-long revenue that would come back in. So that's one of the things that we've, I guess.
So the Norwood River basically has dramatic runoff, right, for the fuel character of it. Then what is this? What is the CFS the rest of the time? Is it low, or is it going to maintain what the use is going to be on the ditch or on the users?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Sucre, if I understand the question, so a couple things. If we talk about some of the flows that we're seeing up there, Alkali Creek is an example, which is what the reservoir's sited on. We may see flood flows on that are on the order of 20 to maybe as high as 100 CFS, but during the rest of the year, it's flowing maybe 5 CFS. And then as you're looking at Paint Rock Creek and Medicine Lodge Creek, those are our two primary creeks that we're diverting from. Medicine Lodge Creek probably peaks at around 500 CFS in the spring. Paint Rock Creek peaks at around 1,000 CFS in the spring, maybe a little bit higher than that. And then they draw down dramatically throughout the year. So that's the area we'd be. The Norwood River itself, if you get down to that, of course, that's a much larger stream. But again, in terms of the project components, we don't have any down specifically on the Norwood.
So there's no, there's more water that comes even in the summertime after the spring runoff than what the users use. Is that what you're saying? So there's still a surplus. There's still a stream. Everything is running besides what the usage is.
Madam Chair, Commissioner, it really depends on the year. There are years where, especially later in the season, where you start to dry up and people physically start having problems getting the water that they need. You run into calls on the river moving up that system. So there is not always water, excess water. Now, in terms of water rights, there is we should have said that earlier. We have obtained the water rights so that we have the storage right for the reservoir and the enlargement rights for the ditches. And there is legally available water for that. But later in the season, the physically available water does decrease, which is the purpose of the reservoir, so that we can augment those flows later in the season.
Thank you for those answers. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Senator Hicks.
So looking at the water rights on the Anita ditch, I think you showed that it's currently 45 CFS, and that would go into the 48-inch irrigated pipeline. Is that correct? So was that calculated that 45 CFS, was that actual counting double appropriation during high flow, or was that single?
Madam Chair, Senator Hicks, that does include the direct right and the surplus right.
Okay, thank you. And just to follow up, Madam Chairman, real quick. So the ditch is currently carrying that 45 CFS, correct?
That is correct.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Director, anything further?
Madam Chair, I'd like to invite the folks up that have traveled down here to show their support for the project. And if you have questions for them.
Great. Thank you so much. Mr. Donner and Mr. Dare, Mr. Thompson, sorry. Yeah, if we come up and state your name and How do you want to do this? Director, just take one by one. Come on up.
Yeah, they can come up and all introduce themselves and maybe they have a spokesman or two or three that want to say something.
Great, welcome.
Thank you for supporting this project. And I'm Nancy Joyce. I'm a landowner and I have shares in this reservoir. And I was on the original steering committee to get this going. So we feel it's a really good project and we appreciate all your help with this. Thank you.
Ms. Joyce, thanks for traveling all the way down to talk to us. We appreciate that.
Madam Chair, my name is John Joyce, also a shareholder.
You can pick that microphone up if you want, or just move this over here so you can sit down now and however it's easiest for you.
As you can see, a lot of people came down. There was a lot more paying attention to this meeting up at home. We, as my wife said, we really appreciate your support and the work that's been done. I think Mark and Derek and Jason gave you a really good overview of the project and starting from the beginning. Just a couple things I wanted to add to that real briefly. We do have a NEPA study and a permit. That is a Herculean task, and with your help and the staff here at Water Development, that's been accomplished. So that is that's quite something to have in place. A third of this reservoir, 32.5% of this reservoir is going to be for a flatwater fishery and flows coming out of the dam, going down the Nowood River to the Bighorn River to maintain native fish populations. The Nowood River is one of the last, there's only 3 in the state that have that native fish population in it without any introductions. And there's no dams on the Nowood, so the Game and Fish looked at that as a special reach of the river that they want to preserve those flows in. So at this point, the shareholders in the reservoir that'll have 2/3 of the water are going to pay for all the operation and maintenance going forward to maintain the recreational opportunities for the reservoir for fishermen, and we're also going to be preserving the native fish that could be someday become threatened and endangered. So those are things that are benefits to the state that go beyond just the irrigation water. Although the irrigation water alone is a substantial benefit. We also look at this as a 200 or 300 year project. We don't look at this as a 10 or 15-year project. The state will be continuing to receive increased revenue through taxes for a long, long time on this project. This water, when it comes down off the mountains in the spring, goes to Montana. It doesn't stay anywhere in this state. It goes into the Bighorn, which dumps into the Yellowstone by Hardin. So I think this is a huge benefit to the state in more ways than just irrigation and recreation. I think having that asset beneficially used within the state will pay off dividends in the future. So thank you again for having us down, and we everybody would like to give their name and maybe a statement or two, and let you know how much we appreciate your work on this.
Thank you, Mr. Joyce, for traveling down. And Senator Hicks, do you have a question for Mr. Joyce?
Yeah, John, so where is your land relative to the Nowood, and what ditches on the main stem do you irrigate out?
Our farm has the Harmony Ditch, it's called, and it's the last head gate before it gets to the Bighorn River. We're about 5 miles up from the confluence of the Nowood and the Bighorn.
And what's the priority date on your stuff relative? So are you guys junior? I mean, even if you're not, I understand how high priority works in Wyoming.
That's correct. Oh, we have some territorial water rights. So in general, when there's a call on the river, it's either done by us or some of our neighbors directly above us. And when the thing starts going dry, and in answer to a question earlier, when there's a call on the river, it generally gets back to at least 1904, and sometimes it'll go clear back to 1890 before those can be satisfied. So when it gets dry there, it really gets dry all the way from Tent Sleep down the Knowood, up to Hyattville and up to Paint Rock and Medicine Lodge.
One more follow-up. So, you know, the original cost estimate on the cost per acre, and I think the director kind of walked through this, was roughly $24 an acre. And I think that was with the 80 million or the $70 million price tag per acre foot of reservoir. That was the repayment cost. And now we're looking at well over $100 million with this potential addition on there. So how, with that differential there, we get to look to that benefit analysis. I think originally it was a couple $1 million of repayment. What's the economics of being able to pay for that component between that differential if we don't do that at 100% from the state standpoint?
The loan that we've agreed to take is $2.1 million. And of that $24 per acre, a little over $17 is debt retirement on that. The rest of that is operation and maintenance. What our concern now is with the requirements of some of the landowners we're negotiating with, perhaps having to maintain an upper pool. And the BLM is going to charge us $25,000 a year to lease their ground. And then we've got wetlands that we have to maintain because of the NEPA requirements. And we're in negotiations with Game and Fish right now on what they want from us. We're not as worried about the loan. That's a fixed amount that we can figure in. The operating costs are starting to mount here. And so those are the things Jason was referring to that we have concerns over, but we don't have an exact dollar figure for that yet until we get the pipeline issue negotiated and done.
So just to follow up and to cut to the chase, because it's going to cost substantially more every time we've looked at this, and we appropriated the original 50 million and some additional 30 million, and now we're looking at an additional, you know, 30 to 50 million dollars by the time we actually finish construction at some point in time. And so have you guys collectively within the district run through analysis and say what's your maximum ability to pay? Where's the cutoff line? If we come back and say, John, it's $50 an acre foot in a reservoir.
When we formed the district, we had to have a figure, and that's what everybody voted on. The figure was $24 an acre foot. Anything above that, I don't have authority to move ahead. So if they want, if the analysis shows that it's going to be $30, we need to run that back by everybody. This has been, you know, closing in on 15 years ago. So things have changed. Costs have gone up. Commodity prices have come up. And so I'm not saying it can't be higher than 24, but we have not had any type of a district-wide vote on what the maximum amount would be.
And just what crops do you raise on your ground?
Personally, we have alfalfa and Coors malt barley. There's some sugar beets grown in the basin there. A lot of grass hay also. And I don't know, some of these other guys, the farmers, can tell you.
Your barley and hay.
What's that?
Your barley and hay.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Joyce. Okay, who wants to come up next? Welcome.
Madam Chairman, I'm Martin Mercer, and this is my wife Kelly. We're the landowners that have sold the 300 and some acres to the state for where the reservoir sits and most of the water impoundment. We'd like to have our kids here with us today, but they're one's home taking care of the ranch, the other one's delivering cattle. And anyhow, they're directly involved in ag is what I'm trying to say. They're 28, 25, and 22, 23. Anyhow, just little kids when me and Cecil Mullins came down here and applied for this project, and hard to believe it's been that short a time ago. But anyhow, our family is we're all directly involved in ag and Wyoming, and we're very thankful for the opportunity to be able to have a shot at storing water. My ancestors they applied for water storage out of Lake Solitude right under Cloud Peak and were denied because of the wilderness area. They applied twice. Therefore, I think probably some of the over adjudication of water, which I think we've all had in Wyoming, those guys were ambitious. Anyhow, we've maintained the needed ditch. I took over at an early age because my dad turned the farming over to me. So if you have any questions in regards to how the needed ditch runs or the other ditches, I'd be happy to answer any questions you folks might have. I want to thank everybody that has taken the time to come down here, and thank all of you folks for your generosity of your time to help run this state. I know a little bit about it, was on the brand board, and it's I got to commend anybody that wants to be in your position. So thank you.
Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, thank you for traveling down, and thank you for your work in the Wyoming Way. Do we have any questions for them? Okay, Senator Hicks.
So, Mr. Mercer, so you are on the Anita ditch, correct? Do you have water rights out of the Anita supplemental too, out of Paint Rock Creek on that?
Madam Chairman, Mr. Hicks, yes, we do. That's where the majority of our water comes from. There is a lower ditch called the Gape and Hyatt ditch that Anita supplemental helps support. It has territorial water. The Anita ditch does not have territorial water, but everybody on the 3 ditches have interest in that Anita supplemental. It's a very valuable part of our canal system.
So I'm assuming that the Anita ditch, is it a company incorporated under the laws of the state of Wyoming?
Madam Chairman, Mr. Hicks, yes, it is.
And so you guys operate under a board.
Madam Chairman, Mr. Hicks, yes, we do.
And so how do you vote? Do you vote based on shares or within your bylaws on the Anita ditch as far as O&M and maintenance and operation and all that within your bylaws?
Madam Chairman, Mr. Hicks, yes, the shares are the vote for the ditch.
And you know, just off the top of your head, how many shares are in the Anita ditch?
Madam Chairman, Mr. Hicks, I believe there's right at the reason I struggle is because we put all 3 ditches in, but I think it's right at 4,000.
And so how many shareholders are there in the Anita ditch, and how many shares do you hold roughly? I don't need to know exactly.
Madam Chairman, Mr. Hicks, we hold just a skosh over 2,000 shares, and there are 5 shareholders on the Anita ditch and 2 shareholders on the Gape and Hyatt ditch.
So
there's 1 shareholder on the Anita supplement.
Okay, and so you are the majority shareholder in the Anita ditch.
Madam Chairman, Mr. Hicks, yes.
Okay. Now, let's talk about prescriptive easements. And so can you tell me what the limit and scope of the prescriptive easement that the Anita Ditch Company has?
Madam Chairman, Mr. Hicks, I do know, I've read a lot of statutes. We operate under a 30-foot easement. And most of the time that's on one side of the ditch. There's a few places where we have room enough to operate on both, but I can tell you that, the needed ditch, has changed down through the years, and we have probably been very, very lenient with other landowners that the easement goes through, and probably to our, not our benefit. And I know quite a little bit about operating that easement because have been the track hoe operator for the last 30 years. And, if my ancestors had been the track hoe operators, they'd have probably been a little bit more, protective of their easement.
So, Madam Chairman, just a little bit of latitude here, if I may.
No problem, Senator Hicks. Thank you.
So I'm still confused now. You said you have an easement or you're claiming a prescriptive easement, because those are two different things under Title 34 and the state of Wyoming statutes. And so do you have a recorded easement on the Anita ditch?
Madam Chairman, no, we operate under a prescriptive easement.
All right. And so under prescriptive easement, there's no defined 30-foot length under the statutes. And so I'm just trying to get to where we're at. It gets back to some of the earlier questions that I was asking the consultant is what's the capacity? You have a right under a prescriptive easement to maintain your ditch, to carry the amount of water that's permitted through that ditch. The easement itself is based on the volume of that water. And so there's no 30-foot length or 50-foot. It's whatever the size is that's reasonable to operate and maintain based on the amount of water in that ditch. And so it's just come to my attention from a number of other individuals up there that there's a concern up there with how the Anita Ditch Company, I'm assuming this was under the authority of the Anita Ditch Company, to maintain that, quote, prescriptive easement, and the scope and the nature and the limitations of that prescriptive easement. And so that's what I'm trying to find out is what is the Anita Ditch Company exerting under the prescriptive easement as to what you're legally entitled to do versus what you think you can do. And that's what I'm trying to understand. Does that help? So I'm just
Madam
trying to
Chairman.
figure, how big a ditch do you need to carry 45 CFS?
Madam Chairman. Yes, sir. I realize where you're going with that. And, I think we were, in my opinion and the opinion of, the water commissioner, Philip Beamer, before it was Dave Dietz, we've had that conversation and looked at the ditch, and they think that we're, within reason, well within reason of the easement that we were using to maintain the Anita ditch and the Anita supplemental.
Okay, well, this will be a discussion because I think what we heard from the engineers at Tri-Hydro that the ditch in its current shape was capable of carrying the 45 CFS. And so it gets back to the nature of the prescriptive easement. And so I think this might be an ongoing discussion at some point in time. So, but I do appreciate you guys coming down today and providing testimony, but you know, we're trying to help get a project done here. We need a little help from the proponents too. So thank you.
Madam Chairman, thank you guys. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, for coming all the way down. We appreciate it. Hello, welcome. Please state your name.
I'm Michael Vigil, and we farm and ranch. My wife Karen here, and my daughter Justine, and her daughter Brookline. We farm up in between Manderson and Hyattville, I guess, and raise sugar beets, barley, corn, hay, run cattle. Everything we do there uses water. We got some of the best water, or some of the best land in the basin right there. But some of it only has a 1974 water right on it. So So a reservoir like this would really benefit that good land, you know, for late season water. So,
And our sons also and family likes the fishing, and so I think the reservoir that way will be beneficial to several families for family outings and so. And our granddaughter actually helps us.
Well, we want to welcome, of course, you, Mr. Vigil, and Karen, and I think you said Justine in Brooklyn, is that
Yes.
right? And the rest of your family, we thank you for, you know, also participating in our Wyoming Ways and raising cattle and that. And I'll see if anyone has any questions for them. Senator Hicks?
Michael, where are you guys located on the system? You must be pretty close to the bottom of the system with the 1974 water right.
well,
And has all of your water come out of the Knowood?
yes, our water's for this farm and ranch does come out of the Knowood. We're 12 miles east of Manderson. We're half, and Manderson, that's where John Joyce's place is, and that's where the Knowood dumps into the Bighorn River. But and we're kind of halfway in between the reservoir and Manderson. So.
And just one follow-up, are you guys, because you're in the district now, the Knowood Watershed Improvement District, are any of you on the board?
Yes, I am myself.
All right, thank you.
Yep, welcome.
I was gonna say my husband and I and our 4 kids also farm along the Knowood. We have a separate farm from my parents, so, yep.
Did you want to say anything else? Did you want to speak? Well, we do thank you for coming all the way down. Any of the commissioners have any questions? So I just have one quick question. Does anyone else participate in like cleaning it out the ditch, or I didn't know how that worked exactly.
Oh, are you talking about the Anita ditch on that?
Yes.
Yes, ours, we don't have no water in that ditch.
Okay.
Ours comes right directly out of the Knowood.
Great.
So.
All right. Any other questions?
I have a quick question, Mr.
Commissioner Suker?
Chairman. So you collect money from the water that you use. So what is there a retainer that you keep, that the ditch company keeps? And if there is, what is that amount of money? You have a reserve, or is this money all spent? A reserve for caring for the ditch, monitoring whatever your needs are, because you do pay in, correct?
Go ahead and turn on your mic. You just have to push the little speaker person. It's a little mouth.
Madam Chairman, these folks are not on that, they don't have land under the Anita ditch. So would you like me to answer his question?
That'd be great. Thank you. Commissioner Suker?
Yeah, go ahead.
Commissioner Suker, we do have an account, but it's fairly well used up each year. There's no leftover money.
So the maintenance that the ditch takes just breaks you even, basically, so.
Madam Chairman, yes, Mr. Suker, that's how it's operated.
So if something changed, what would change to allow you to do a repayment or create a surplus, or at least a contingency fund that if something dramatic happened there, that you could fix yourself, or the ditch company could?
Madam Chairman, just yearly, what's the word I'm looking for?
Assessment.
Assessment. Yeah, a yearly assessment. Sorry about that.
So is your assessment fixed, or is it based on the amount of money that you need to maintain?
Madam Chairman. Yeah, it's based on just what we maintain each year, what we use to maintain. It's aquatic weed killer, track hoe time, and the amount of work that goes into unforeseen. You know, we just pretty well settle up from last year's costs this year.
So you just balance the budget. That's what it amounts to. Okay.
Right.
That's thank you for that answer.
Thank you, Commissioner Suker. Okay, come on up and introduce yourself. Welcome.
My name's Stephen Henney. I'm actually from Pennsylvania. I have 2 small farms on the Knowood. I get all my water out of the Knowood. Some comes out of the Avon Canal for the lower farm. I have a direct point of diversion out of the Knowood. A couple things. I rent my land to Mitch Virgil, and he made me come here, so I got stuck. But 2 things. I understand from the representatives here. Part of the problem we have is the public has a conception, even in Pennsylvania, that farmers as a whole get a phenomenal amount of subsidies from the government. And when you have a project like this, there's a lot of people in the public are thinking, here we have a bunch of rich landowners who have far more land than they deserve or percentage-wise. And so we have this public that's saying, why, and the representatives have to answer their constituents, that here we are giving all this money to put in a reservoir to benefit a few farmers or a few rich landowners or rich ranchers. But when I looked at what the cost benefits to the public were, I think we were missing out. For one, there's a certain amount of land that was not accessible to the public is now accessible if this project goes through. Number 2, there's tremendous amount of benefits when it comes to recreation, whether it's fishing, bird watching. I mean, this reservoir is going to give considerable habitat to the bald eagle and the ospreys, to numerous shorebirds, sandpipers, songbirds, red-winged blackbirds, and also hunting, and then the other recreation benefits. And when you look at, when you drive through certain parts of this state, without water, the state, there's virtually no benefit. When you get over towards, south of Gillette and stuff where there is no irrigation or virtually no irrigation, there's virtually no benefit to the public, whether it's financially or recreationally. So I think we're way underestimating the benefit to the public from irrigation water. And so I think some of the numbers that were given here, I don't think there was enough cost, however you want to put it, benefit putting to the public. I think the public benefits not only financially but from recreation far more than the engineering firm or whatever government agent determines that felt that they deserved. And I think if you put more, I think if it would have been at least what I consider a cost benefit, the number, the one, the 120 million, if you add a greater cost percentage to the public and to the tax base, short term as well as long term, I don't think there would be this difference of the 13 million. I think it would be exact opposite. I think there'd be more of a $13 billion, million dollar. Yeah. I've been dealing with the government, so I'm in the billions now, but $13 million difference. Right now, you're showing a $13 million deficit to this project. And I think it's because I don't think you're giving enough, you're not assessing enough profit or benefits to the public on this. And I think if we push more towards the public benefits, you will lessen the sentiment that the government is helping the farmers. Between the NRS, the public money that goes towards the NRCS projects, crop insurance. I mean, the government subsidy that goes towards crop insurance and some of these other projects, which I personally don't think should be done as much as I think this is far more beneficial to the public than say crop insurance. And I would rather see money put towards this rather than towards crop insurance. And I know they're probably getting ready to tell me to shut up, but it's just I just think there's far more benefits from the representative standpoint, that if they would put more benefits towards this reservoir and take money away from crop insurance, there'd be a greater benefit not only to these farmers, but also and ranchers, but also to the public.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. I'd like to just comment on that and see if you agree. I think when we did have the director speak, he did say that, technically 104, but he says there's lots of other benefits that, weigh in on this beyond what he's, that amount. And I think part of it too is we need to have water retained here in Wyoming. We don't want it going to Montana. That's a benefit to Wyoming too, because there's going to be water calls and things like that happen. It took a long time. You guys have been here almost, past 14 years trying to get all the NEPA permits and things like that. So time is also of the essence, and that's a benefit. So I think you would agree that we also understand that there's benefits, and the director has to, tell us that we're hitting the right amount of benefits, and they will make sure we do. So I think you would agree that we're not too, I don't think we're as worried as you think about that.
Okay.
But we do want to thank you. Did you come all the way out from Pennsylvania?
Well, I come out here every spring to get because I'm part of the Avon Canal. I have come out to get that open up, make sure the pivots and everything are going, and to keep an eye on Mitch.
Good thing. Somebody needs to. Does Senator Hicks have any questions? Because usually he does.
No,
Ma'am.
you figured you wouldn't.
Mr. Craig, Vice Chairman Craig has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to maybe put your mind at ease a little bit. If you look at the purpose of the Water Development Commission, it is for when the law was passed that created water development in Wyoming. And I can't tell you the dates or even the exact language, but the purpose is to develop water for the benefit of the people of Wyoming, public, farmers, ranchers, municipalities. That's kind of generic, but myself personally, and I hope I'm speaking for the commission as a whole, we're in favor of these projects. What you're facing is a huge hurdle with easement issues. And I know you're looking at these options. This pipeline option has created a significant increase in the cost. What we're faced with is trying to figure out how to help you put that thing in place. So you have a system that'll last the next 200 years, which was discussed a little bit ago. I'm an irrigator in the Bighorn Basin myself. I farm up in Powell. I have family, I have grandchildren that are with us on our property. So I'm very aware of what you're facing. We're fortunate. We're under a large project and we don't have the late season water shortage issues that you guys face. I sympathize with you. We'll do everything we can to try to help you. But there are certain things we can't do. There are certain things that you guys will have to do. And hopefully working together, we can get through this.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Thank you,
I
Mr.
didn't know
Lee.
if you were up here to drag me back there or not.
Okay. Do you have anything further, Mr. Joyce?
No chokeholds there.
Madam Chair, I just, from the questions, I just wanted to try to make a quick clarification. When the river basin study was done, there were over 40 sites for reservoirs that were identified in that study. And we, mainly the engineers and the staff here, narrowed it down to a couple locations, and this one was chosen. And one of the big benefits of this location is that it's an off-channel location. It's very difficult anymore, as you all know, to dam off a major river somewhere. The Alkali Creek is an ephemeral stream that does not come out of the mountains. It drains some hills, so once the snow is gone in the spring, it dries up. So I think it's done all around the state and all around the country to build a off-channel reservoir, use a canal to fill the reservoir out of the diversion off of rivers and streams like we're proposing here. And I think it's reasonable and has been done all over to use an existing canal, 100-year-old canal, to fill that reservoir with. We have a permit from the state engineer's office now, so we have water allocated to this reservoir, and I think it's well within water law and reasonableness to assume that we could use an existing canal to fill this reservoir with. Thank you.
Thank you for coming down and taking the time for all of you. We do appreciate it. We know you all have plenty of things to do, especially right now. It's here it comes summer. So good luck to all of you and your hard work up there. And we do appreciate you coming down. Director?
I think that pretty much says it all. I won't say what I've always said in the past, but I think storing water is invaluable to the state of Wyoming. We look at how dramatically we see shifts in, weather every year. Either we've got big snowpack years or we have hardly anything. And then you think you have big snowpack years and then no runoff comes off because the soil's so dry. So I think it's crucial we store water in Wyoming. We've got a permit here. We've spent probably $5 million over the last however many years it's been since 2010 to get to this point. I always come back to what is the benefit cost ratio. It's over 1. It's 1.33 over the life of the project. And that life of the project, could be a lot longer than what was just looked at in the benefit cost ratio. I understand there's things we can't necessarily quantify with bird watching and things like that. We can always get creative on those things. We're just trying to be consistent with how we've looked at other projects. And I think, like I said before, this additional cost by putting this into a pipe really shouldn't be a burden necessarily on the district when we look at it on a benefit cost ratio and public benefit. Because if they could get the easements without putting it into a pipe, then it would all work out the way our criteria likes it to work out. So in my mind, that's very similar to an environmental mitigation, the concept written into the criteria. So, I think we can work around that if you guys thought so as well. So anyway, if anybody else has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Senator Hicks?
Just back to a technical question on the pipeline aspect. I know it was mentioned there was a number of seepage areas and looking at when even it was an open a ditch clay liner and some of these type of things for lining. Do we have any idea what the conveyance losses are from the point of diversion to the reservoir site?
We've just been, we haven't quantified it. We've just been using kind of 10% the general number.
So Director, just so that since Representative Summers is online, if you'll just answer the question.
Yeah, so the consultant said what we've been using is 10%, but we haven't actually done conveyance loss studies on the actual canal.
But those are based on regional curves or some estimate, knowing that you have seepage losses and some phreatophytes in the system. And
Martin, do you have any better information?
As far as loss?
Yeah.
Mr. Mercer, welcome back.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Senator Hicks, therefore, the reason for a good cleaning. And there's a lot, it changes as you go throughout the year. And I would say, like right now while we're running it, we have a weir at the head gate and we have a weir at the end of the ditch. And our losses are minimal right now. But as the grass comes in and as the moss comes up, it just goes down. And I'd say by the time the middle of the year, when it gets hot, we're at least 1/3 of a loss. So, and that depends sometimes on how good a job we get with the moss, with the aquatic killer. So I'd say average over the whole year, we're at least 1/3 loss.
all right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mercer. Senator Larson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So
we're looking at the project cost here, or at least I am, and I'm seeing 120 million. Is that what I'm looking at for, if we did the pipeline and, the Hamilton embankment? And that's in $24, or $2024. What would you anticipate if we are 2 years later, or do we have an idea?
Madam Chair, Senator Larson, you can predict inflation as well as I can. Hopefully it'll come down, but I doubt that. Maybe it'll
Talk to me
remain
after the
static.
election and we'll have that conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
So one more technical question I have, and it comes back to the embankment, and it appears to me where that's at, and not understanding the structure of that completely. But there could be some substantial sediment retention benefits associated with that embankment from Alkali Creek if it's constructed. In other words, it's going to extend the life of the reservoir. If that embankment is structured, I guess as Alkali Creek is the biggest sediment yielder within, so it's not going to be Paint Rock and Medicine Creek, it's Alkali Creek. And so getting back to your calculations of a cost to benefit analysis, the embankment's $750,000, but it could very well extend the life of that reservoir for a number of years as far as the actual storage capacity in there. And so I'd like to see maybe that calculated into the cost to benefit analysis too, and take a look at that. We all know we've been through a number of reservoir projects where we're raising dams because of lost capacity. That dike could very well serve that purpose. And that should be calculated into a benefit to the project. So just something to look at.
Thank you, Senator Hicks. Senator Colby, you have a question?
I do, Madam Chairman. First, I guess I want to follow up on the last question about when this thing's going to be completed. I guess sitting up here, I've come to discover that these projects take decades in many cases. And all these cost estimates we come up with are irrelevant, because by the time you're done, inflation has changed that number tremendously. I think in this one, they talked about, 15 years ago, they decided a $24 amount was a right amount for the assessment for that water. And honestly, I think it's doubled over this time. I mean, honestly, doubled. And I mean, when is the point? I mean, first is when is the completion date? I mean, realistically, getting these right of ways done. And I realize you have to guess at this because some of these are some uncertainties, but I think it plays an important role in the analysis of what we can afford to do and where we can afford to do it. Not that any of these things are bad things, but there has to be an analysis done on the cost to benefit ratio. And I think I just haven't heard that much sitting here, for the short time I've been on Select Water, trying to understand these project costs. So I guess estimated completion date, maybe it's a WAG thing, I'm not sure. And also a reanalysis of the amount of money that, say, a district is willing to pay for the said water they'd receive from the benefit of the project. I mean, if it takes 10 years or 15 years to come up with a project that, you put a shovel to and you're actually building it, in the meantime, is it unreasonable to ask for more money from the people that are part and parcel with the project, that they're getting a direct benefit, for millions, 100 and whatever, 120, 150 million, I'm not sure. So I'd like to get a better handle on just, I guess, how it works, and what do you think in this situation where we can be at the end of the day with costs, and what do you think is reasonable to reevaluate possibly the cost for the water that was agreed to, say, 15 years ago, which I understand it's quite a while ago, but just your thoughts on that, Director.
So, Madam Chair, Senator Kolb, in regards to completing the project, if we want to move forward when trying to design the pipeline and go along those routes, and then go back to these landowners and talk about pipeline, and they're all amenable to signing easements now, maybe we have an easement or easements in place by the end of the year. We don't want to move forward with design until we have the easements in place. We're at about 50% design right now. So then assume, okay, end of the year, we have easements, and that's a big assumption. Maybe all of next year to finish up the designs and get bid or plans and specs in place and bid the project, end of 25 or early 26. And then you're probably looking at a 2-year to 3-year construction timeframe. So where does that get you? 26, all of 26, 27, 28, first fill 2029. So anyway, you're bidding the project, say in early 26. Again, I don't know what the prices are going to be in 26. Let's just assume they're static, but they'll probably go up 3, 4, 5% by then. So I don't know what the dollars are associated with then putting that to 120. In regards to $24, 15 years ago is what they were willing to pay. I can guarantee you the price of alfalfa has not gone up like the price of construction costs over the years. And I guess I'd rely on these guys and others to know what the price of alfalfa is or their profit, from raising alfalfa as it was compared to 15 years ago, but it's not, I don't think it's that much more. And then you got to realize the cost to harvest that alfalfa and the price of diesel fuel's gone up and the price of machinery's gone up and everything else. So it's not a one-to-one direct relationship on their profits gone up. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but.
Madam Chairman.
Mr. Mercer, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Cole, I think like our chairman of the board said, we as a district, as a board, this was voted on favorably. If you want to at any time, John, come up and get a chokehold on me, but it was voted on favorably to form the watershed district. And then we sold the shares, and that was not all that long ago. And we had $24, and that was based on where we were then, and that was quite a lot less. So not saying that people wouldn't vote favorably on raising their shares, but it's going to be a tough sell because we've already went long. We promised them that it would probably be done by now at least, and here we are down the road, and it's I think water is valuable to everybody in the state of Wyoming, and I think to the state as well. And I think if you, in my opinion, I think the state needs to shoulder some of that cost right along with the people that are using it as well, because they tell us what we can and can't do with it. We're just the permit holder. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Majority Floor Leader, Nyman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a few questions for my own, excuse me, my own edification. And Mr. Mercer, you can probably answer these questions, or maybe Jason, you can look at, give me some answers on this. How many producers are currently being served by this project or will be served by this project?
Madam
Actual
Chair,
landowners.
Representative Nyman, I believe last time I talked with John, it was 33 different shareholders. Is that accurate, John? Yeah, 33 or
34 potentially. How many acres are currently under irrigation now that are actually being served by this project? Or that will be, benefiting from this project?
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, I just looking for that. I have it in my notes here.
Welcome back. Mr. Donner, welcome back. Thanks. We thought it was 15,000, Chairman, is what Vice Chairman Craig told me.
Go
I couldn't see the slide over there. My eyes are over half a century old, and I didn't bring my spectacles because
Vice Chairman Craig has better eyes than you.
Well ahead.
So is that correct then? The 15,000?
No, Madam Chair, so the 15,000, that's how many irrigated acres are within the watershed improvement district. So they would have the potential in terms of exchange. In terms of, if we go back to the one figure we had up there, we had a circle around kind of the service area and tied to specifically to the shareholders in the reservoir. It's about 7,000 acres that are tied to those shareholders. In terms of what's in production right now, then they have another 1,300 acres that there's permits for, but they're currently idle. So that's another 1,300 acres that could be put in production that are tied specifically to the reservoir shareholders as opposed to just those folks that are part of the watershed improvement district.
Thank you for clarifying. Does that answer your question? Do you have further questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple other questions.
Great.
So currently you've got basically 8,300 acres that are 7,000 that are being irrigated by this project that would be irrigated, 1,300 that are in what would you call construction or able to be irrigated. Now you said 15,000, about 15,000, that is other acres that are potentially can be served by this if developed. Is that, so we're looking at another potentially 7,000 acres that could be utilizing this water?
Madam Chair, Representative Newman, that's correct. Those would be acres that aren't tied to lands for folks that are currently not shareholders in the reservoir.
Okay, so have these folks been approached as far as are they willing or are they wanting to invest in this? Because I guess my question is, as we looked at, and you guys touched on it briefly, agriculture irrigated land is the highest value appraised land in the state of Wyoming as far as agriculture is concerned, because I have it myself up at home. They love to see you making an irrigated acre of ground in my county. So I guess that's something I need to kind of get my head around here is the value that this is going to potentially mean to your county. That's ultimately going to be dollars that are going to be coming in on appraisal. And so that's how is this investment with these 34 folks and potentially how many others are there that could develop lands that are going to increase the value of the appraisal in the county? And what kind of dollars, has there been any put together figures that are going to say, what is the potential dollars that this is going to impact or return on the investment in the county based on those acreage figures that are, available to that water project?
Madam Chair, we don't have an exact figure for you. The difference between this and an irrigation project such as in Powell, where they built the project, broke out the new ground and started irrigating out of the canal with that water. This is supplemental water. So this would enable people to grow more valuable crops on existing land and also put in some new ground. And if you drive up through there, you'll see there's some new center pivots going up that are pumped to up above the river floor. So most of the valley right now is irrigated gravity out of the canals or individual ditches. If there was an assurance that you could get water late in the season, as I think you heard Michael Vigil talk about, then there could be more ground put in. The exact number of that, some of that depends on what the cost of electricity is going to do to lift that water up there. But there's plenty of more acres that could be irrigated if they were assured that they had water. We really do dry the creek up almost completely by August generally, and sometimes in July. So you can't count on growing a crop if you didn't have some reservoir water. So putting in new ground is dependent on the reservoir. Adding value to the existing ground is also dependent on this reservoir.
Madam Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So, I mean, realistically, this water is just going to basically make sure that you've got enough water to water through the full season for quite frankly, the current 7,000 plus potentially 1,300. Is that about where we're at? So, I mean, ultimately, are we looking at this is going to be an investment for approximately 8,300 acres for a consistent flow of water through the course of the season? Is that what we're looking at? We're not expanding acres. We're not gathering more acres to raise the appraisal. We're simply creating a consistent water supply for that base acres that are currently being served. Is that true?
Madam Chairman, no. My son was headed down here today and wasn't able to make it, but he wants to put in a center pivot. He's not going to do it unless he can get reservoir water. He can't put the expense of the pipeline and the pump and everything else in and then expect to some years not make a crop because it dries up. So there's that project I'm very aware of, and there's other ones just like that up and down the valley that would go in if they knew that they had shares in the reservoir to be able to put it in.
Is that part of the 1,300 or is that in addition to the 1,300 acres? This would expand beyond the 8,300 acres?
I couldn't give you an exact figure on that. I think, yeah, I wouldn't really know.
Chairman.
Thank you.
Well,
Senator
we
Hicks?
started it, so I'm just gonna take off from there. So when I look at the reservoir and we'll store approximately 8,900 acre feet of water. How much of that is dedicated to the irrigation pool? There was referenced at 32% is the environmental pool and supplemental releases. So we're gonna back into hopefully Majority Floor Leader to try to get to this question. So what is the irrigation pool? in the
Madam Chair,
reservoir?
6,000 acre feet is what we've been allocated.
6,000? And so typically under these water development projects prior to construction, there's a sign up for those. So these 6,000 acre feet of irrigation water has been a sign up already assigned to those. Did it include any new acres or any of this unirrigated but permitted land now? And so how many acres is that? Because it may not be an acre foot per acre based on the number of shares you sold. So how many shares have you sold for that 6,000 acre feet?
We assigned 1 acre foot of water per share. So we've sold 6,000 shares and that's 6,000 acre feet. We did not ask the shareholders what they intended to do with them. So if they thought they were going to use 6 inches on existing ground and use a 6 inches on some new ground, that would be up to them. And I don't have a good reading for you on exactly how much new ground would go in after the reservoir went in.
So when you did the signups, they're not tied to an existing adjudicated water right? Getting back to my colleague's thing there, is this strictly supplemental or is it available for other projects when you did the sign up? You didn't have to adjudicate that stored water to an existing water right.
Our understanding of what we've been operating under is that under state water law, stored water is not assigned, doesn't have to be, doesn't need to be assigned to a piece of ground. And so none of the water that we sold shares for is allocated to a certain piece of ground. The district had a requirement that in order for you to purchase shares, you had to own land in the district. So with those shares is a property description so that we verify that that person lives in the district and owns property in the district. That does not mean that that water had to be applied to those acres.
Okay, now I'm gonna change questions, Director, to you. Typically, when you do NEPA, particularly with the Corps and some of these entities, EPA loves to weigh in on those core permits. And so is the NEPA done on supplemental only or for additional acres? Because they oftentimes, the core permit will put a stipulation that this can't be used for any additional irrigated acres. So what did the NEPA document reflect in the record of decision? And the 404 permit?
Yeah, it didn't stipulate that it had to be used for specific acreage. I mean, it was evaluated existing and
Yeah, we pointed out both when we did all the hydrologic modeling, that it could be used on irrigated acres as well as irrigated but idle, or I should say permitted but idle acres. So we ran the analysis for both scenarios. No, not that I'm remember.
Madam Chair, Senator Hicks, we have an agreement with Water Development Commission that specifies that we use the water in the district for agricultural purposes. So we're not, as a shareholder, we're not able to sell that water to somebody else outside the area. I shouldn't say we can't. We have to consult with the state, and if there's going to be a benefit, then the state receives that benefit. That's not a NEPA requirement. That's a
Make sure you hit your mic. Just so poor Representative Summers can hear. All right, thank you. Any further comments? Director. Any other further questions from the commission?
One more question. So,
Senator
so
Hicks?
back to this 6,000 acre feet and the shares you've sold, and it's not specified to any particular land, and that's allocated at that level at 1 acre foot per acre. Your consumptive use is probably 36 inches up there on the no wood. 36 consumptive use of your crop. Anyway, okay, if it's lower, that's a good thing, because then you could spread that water more. Is at some point in time anticipated, you already got direct flow. This is a supplemental. You could, it may only take you 1 foot, right? Or half a foot to be able to meet your late season irrigation demands, which would allow you then to sell more shares in the reservoir. Is that something that you guys have contemplated or not, or opening up to people that didn't get in on the initial sign up?
Madam Chair, we discussed that and we decided to set it at 1 acre foot per share. It really, that covers the 6,000 acre feet. If we wanted to go back and change that and make it 6 inches per acre foot, we'd have twice as many shares, but we'd still have the same amount of water. And I think you'd have to charge a lot less per share. So that's just a matter of math. If you have a share and you have 12 inches and you end up using 6 inches in the fall when you need it, and 6 inches on another acre, that doubles the amount of acres you can irrigate with that. But it doesn't change the amount of water that we're available to let shares out on.
Thank you for the answer, Mr. Joyce. Appreciate it. And so if we have no further questions, any further comments, Director, or should we let everyone be released here?
Madam Chair, I don't have any further comments.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming up and helping out. So I guess we'll move on to, thank you all again for coming so far. We do appreciate it. We hope you all have safe travels back, or unless you're staying for tomorrow. So that's great, whichever works. And so we're going on to our summer workshop. Is that correct, Director, or anything else you want to talk about?
Madam Chair, yeah. Summer workshop, don't have a lot more details at this point. It's going to be in Evanston, like we've already talked about.
Excuse me, sorry, I didn't see that. Speaker Summers has got a question. Sorry, Speaker Summers, go ahead.
Thank you. And can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
I do think it would be interesting, Jason, on a lot of projects to try to, even though I know inflationary, whatever the inflationary value is, we'll never know, but we can do some averages. I think when we have projects like this, I think it's important to try to understand the end price of what we're doing, because ultimately that comes back to the cost benefit ratio. And so I would hope that as we look at this project, we try to take a look the best we can at some inflationary numbers to see how that plays out. I mean, I'm all for doing water projects, but it's got to make sense in the end too. And this is getting dangerously close to not making sense.
Madam Chair, Representative Summers, I agree. A lot of times we usually try to take and inflate those to the midpoint of construction. So we'll take a look at that and make sure we get those updated.
Thank you, Speaker Summers. Thank you, Director. Okay. Senator Hicks?
No, I just didn't know if there was anybody else that wanted to testify or talk to this project here in the audience other than the members of the district. And so I just know there's other people and I don't know why they're here. I don't think it's to go over our summer conversation, but if they wanted to had anything they wanted to add to the conversation.
Maybe they're bringing stuff for us for barbecue. All right. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this project at all that's in the audience? I apologize. Anyone else? It's your last chance. Okay.
All right. Thank you. Just
Thank
wanted
you.
to make
I
sure.
appreciate that, Senator Hicks. That's great. So thank you. And Director, go ahead.
So in regards to the summer tour, we'll be at the Roundhouse in Evanston. We're still kind of working out the details of the tour. So I want to get those in place before I say too much more about them in case they're not possible. So I was hoping to have more for you, but I don't have anything else on that one today. If we want to move forward to the discussion, we've got a couple of items on that.
That'd be great. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
So I would invite George Mosier up.
Welcome, Mr. Mosier.
We've got an update on the Douglas test well study.
Great.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. George Mosier, once again with the Water Development Office. By now, those of you familiar with seeing my face are recognizing that well drilling is a messy business, both figuratively and realistically. So as some background for the Douglas well drilling project, that's a project that we've had ongoing with the Commission and Douglas since 2017. That project is now on its third amended contract, so we've extended it a couple of times. And you all probably remember that last May, I was in front of you with that third amendment to accomplish a couple of things. That amendment added a little bit more time to the contract, and it also added additional money that we sought as a result of some initial drilling bids that came in higher than we contemplated in 2017. As a result of that, our consultant, Weston Engineering, rebid the drilling project and selected a consultant in accordance with the contract that we have in place. The drilling on that project began in very late September of last year, September of 2023. That drilling effort, while originally slated to be complete right at the end of the year, December 26th of 2023, has continued, and the contractor is still on site as of today. There were significant delays during this winter. The contractor really struggled a lot with some zones of lost circulation material while trying to drill this hole. Just to kind of calibrate your thinking around the test well project, this was designed to be an effort that would drill a well to approximately 1,400 feet below ground surface. And then we would be doing aquifer testing, long-term pump testing in order to try to calibrate our thinking about the feasibility for tying that into Douglas's water supply system. Douglas has another well that is located in pretty close proximity that was drilled during a much earlier effort. And so kind of part of the well siting was that we understood that there was certainly some ability for productive capacity in the aquifer there. Now, with in mind that this was targeted to be on the order of a 1,400-foot deep well, the maximum depth that the driller reached so far, and they actually they reached 450 feet below ground surface. They've had some significant challenges during the drilling operation. They are the most recent development is that as of about six weeks ago, they were pulling back on some of the reaming tools that they were using down this hole in order to open it up. They became stuck in the borehole. So they essentially have been stuck for about 7 weeks. And what has really brought this, I guess, to a head is that Douglas's existing well that's located in fairly close proximity, they need to turn on to begin supplying their summer demands. And they have projected Monday as the time when they want to turn on their existing well. That has led to a flurry of correspondence between both the office and the consultant to the contractor, outlining expectations for when we would like this particular borehole attempt terminated. I think it's our professional opinion that the contractor is irretrievably stuck in the hole. They've not really made any forward progress on getting unstuck for 7 weeks now. And given the nature of this particular aquifer, we have concerns regarding just endlessly leaving a borehole and drilling pipe and things like that open and exposed to the environment. So as recently as today, I understand they've been able to remove some of their equipment from the borehole, mostly some drilling pipe, some drill stem that sticks up. We've been in communication with the Department of Environmental Quality regarding their expectations for plugging this unsuccessful hole I think we have a path forward. Unfortunately, I believe at this point, they were not able to have a cement delivery yet today. So I think that we are hopeful that that can happen tomorrow morning. Just given the nature of the investment of both time and resources that we've put into this, Director Mead suggested that I give you guys just a brief update on that. I don't think that we're looking for any direction at this point. I would expect, because we're still kind of like even today mid-stride on this, there'll probably be some future discussions. But I also invited Levi Heim, who is the representative for Weston Engineering, to join us on the line. And if there are any questions from either members of the commission or from folks in Select Water that are also here, then we could attempt to answer those questions as best we can.
Thank you, George. Mr. Heim, welcome. And do any of the commissioners or Select Water have questions?
Madam Chairman,
Commissioner Suker, and then I'll get to Senator Hicks next.
I guess I just have one. Who selects the spot that the well is drilled? Who makes that selection?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Suker, thank you for that question. As part of this study, there was actually a significant amount of investigation as to where the well site would be located. A whole bunch of criteria went into that, involving both the structural relief and structural characteristics that we were looking for, zones where we might find additional permeability in the aquifer, as well as ultimately where we might be able to gain easement and access. You'll recall part of earlier presentations and frustrations that I've expressed about Douglas was that this particular negotiation for easement and access was very protracted. It was difficult. Once we kind of settled in on a couple of areas that looked like they would be really productive, it became challenging to negotiate that access. So with that said, that is something that is agreed to and recommended by the consultant and agreed to as something that seems at least preliminarily feasible to the office. I guess that's the simple way to put it. It's something that's recommended by the consultant and something that is agreeable to the office.
So no geologist involved in the location?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Suker, quite the opposite. The consulting firm is specifically chosen for their geologic experience, and to the best of my knowledge within the office, this project has always been supervised by a professional geologist.
Thank you.
So I
Senator
got a
Hicks.
question, Madam Chairman, for Eli. I thought it was Eli. Is that correct?
Levi.
Levi. All right. So Levi, in your opinion, was the reason that the driller got stuck based on geology or operation?
It was my opinion that it was based off of operational issues.
Thank you. So next question, Mr. Director. So once we've got a determination from the consultant on board that this was an operational mistake, who's financially liable now for this well?
Madam,
or should I say this borehole with some equipment stuck down? It's not a well.
Madam Chair, Senator, thank you for that question. I would actually characterize it as unsuccessful borehole with associated ancillary equipment. So I think from the office's perspective, it's important to understand that contractually, the commission has a contract with the consultant, Weston Engineering. Weston Engineering is the firm that ultimately enters into the contract with this particular contractor. It's our position that, we have invested effort after this project, and we do expect to receive a product for that investment. I think ultimately there will probably end up being some discussion, perhaps with attorneys involved, between the contractor and the consultant as to who's responsible for the financial burden associated with that. But I think our office's perspective is that we deserve some sort of product for the commission as a result of that.
Thank you, George.
Madam Chair, in response to the senator's directive, I fully intend to keep you appraised.
Thank you. Any further questions, Commission? Select Water. All right, well, thank you so much, George. Hey, Director, anything further? Any further surprises?
Madam Chair, that is it, because we already talked about the ARPA kind of out of order. So that's all I have unless there's any other discussion or if I'm missing anything. Okay.
Okay, thank you. And so then we would adjourn and then we will come back tomorrow morning here at 8:30. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. We don't need a motion. We just go ahead and go forth, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and for Select Water, we'll see you guys tonight at 6.